the first member of this book, in treating of the admirable effects in sympathy which are brought to pass by the magnetical attraction of like unto like. Chapter 1. Herein is expressed how by comparing the mineral lodestone and his attractive virtues with those of the animal and vegetable, we may find out and bring to a demonstrable light the wonderful effects that do lurk in them both, since it is a thing most worthy of observation among wise men, that there is nothing in the celestial orbe which hath not his like in the terrestrial, so verily, there is nothing in the mineral kingdom which hath not his like in the vegetable. And again, the likeness of the vegetable sphere is found in the animal, I mean in love and hatred, in attraction and expulsion, in union and divorce. But, because in the mineral kingdom there is found nothing in all the world, so near in virtue unto the action and life of the animal, as is the magnet or lodestone, since that it affecteth sensibly, his ferruginous like, it seemeth to woo and lust after it, and attracteth it eagerly, and lastly, uniteth itself unto it after a marvelous manner, even as the female and male do in the animal kingdom. For this reason every like particle in the animal or vegetable kingdom, that worketh after the same manner, are justly termed magnetical. Hereupon the well-experimented Dr. Paracelsus, when he writeth of the mystical mummies, as well corporal as spiritual, and of the attractive means or manner to extract them, as well out of the living as dead body, he, for the better instruction of his scholars, and such as he termeth filios artis, the children of art, expresseth examples, drawn from the lodestone and the iron, for by it he doth sufficiently declare the manner of extracting the said mummy, and consequently doth open after his fashion, what the microcosmicall or animal magnet is, by means whereof it is extracted out of the body, namely that it is a corporeal or substantial thing. As he seemeth to justify in these words, spiritualis mumia non operatur nisi per corporelia media, the spiritual mummy worketh not but by corporal means. Where he intimateth by corporal means, those secret magnetical bodies, which suck it forth of the living animal, and make it to operate, as well at home by an immediate contract as abroad, namely in or at an unlimited distance, that is to say by a natural and convenient transplantation. He therefore who is wise and profound in these mysteries of nature, and unto whom the sympathetical concordance, abstruse properties, nature, virtues and original of the lodestone and the iron is well known, will know that their example may fitly be applied unto man, for by it he may easily discern the microcosmical magnets, and understand the manner of their extraction of the spiritual mummy out of man, and withal conceive the proper end and usage thereof. That therefore these things may be the better dilated and enucleated unto the well-wishing reader, I think it fit in the first place to touch a little the same string of one symphonical concordance, that doth concern the nature and original of the lodestone and the iron, which we have more fully mentioned in the precedent book of this our discourse, that thereby we may with a greater facility gather what the microcosmical magnets are. As I told you before, in the 3rd chapter of the 2nd book of this treatise, that it was evident that the lodestone, otherwise called the calamite or mineral magnus, proceedeth not of any natural beginning, but rather of a monstrous birth and original, forasmuch as it seemeth after the manner of a mule, to be procreated of unequal and unlike genitors or parents, being that his mother, or corporeal and passive mass appeareth evidently to be a common saturnine stony mercurial substance, and the father or active form a metallic or sulphureous marial spirit. Now after what manner the mixtion of these two are made, I beseech you to observe in a word, when the saturnine mercurial liquor of the stony nature was as yet in his first matter, near unto the mercury of Mars, namely, the magnetical nature, and the iron mine. For this reason, to wit, because of their near alliance and propinquity in existence, there was required but a light and easy transmutation, to unite them into one body, and therefore it seemeth to enjoy a middle nature, between a metal and a stone. And it may well be called a half-transmuted saturnine mercury, into the which, when the spirit of the martial sulphur, as a metallic form, hath entered, it receiveth it as his passive mother, and conserveth it within itself, and is coagulated into a stony body, which is called the calamite, magnet or lodestone. Now since every spirit doth principally affect and covet, to be nourished with that which is nearest and likest unto his nature, the which nature and spirit is found to be onely in iron, and therefore they are observed to proceed from one mine, or the same extreme matrix, yea, that out of the magnet body the perfectest iron or steel is extracted, it ariseth from the consideration that the martial and saturnine spirit of the lodestone sucketh and attracteth from the center the body of iron unto it, drawing forth of it his formal beams as it were his spiritual food. But because the iron body will not forsake so easily his inward spirit, it followeth and is sucked unto it. And again the iron finding the like spirits in the lodestone, doth covet as fast to be possessor of them, by an equal coition or desire, and so a conjunction or union is made no otherwise between them, than between man and wife. But because the lodestone is fuller of the saturnine stony mercury than the iron, which is purified from it by fire, and consequently more near unto the property of the male, therefore it sucketh not the lodestone so greedily unto it, as the lodestone doth the iron. For it is an old confirmed axiom that matter doth desire and long after form, and as eagerly doth draw and allure it, as the female doth the male. But that the iron is in lieu of the male, it appeareth, in the strength that it addeth unto the lodestone. For if the lodestone's pole be capped with steel, it doth so far animate it beyond his own proper nature, that it causeth it to draw unto it a far greater proportion of iron than otherwise it was able. This therefore being rightly considered, we may with the greater facility collect what that microcosmical lodestone should be, that is able to extract the microcosmical spirit without any damage or debilitation of the body. If therefore we would attempt to effect this excellent exploit, we must do it by such a corporal magnet as shall be taken out of the microcosm or man, whose production and generation must in every respect accord and agree with that of the macrocosmical or terrene mineral lodestone which is mentioned before, the which I purpose only by circumlocution, and not in plain terms to express unto you, that thereby so great a secret as this key, to unlock the balsamic cabinet of man's mummial nature, may be hidden from the unworthy, and yet sufficiently made manifest unto the worthy and religious philosopher, by evident circumstances. For if that such hidden mysteries in nature were vulgarly discovered, there would be no difference had between a wise man and a fool. And therefore Solomon did teach us, quod sit sapientis solare rem, it is the part of a wise man to hide the thing. And the wise philosophers in their writings did so considerately express the secret of nature, that they might hide it from the ignorant and uncapable vulgar, and yet speak plainly to such as are the children of art, and sons of true learning. But this is not all, for I would have you to understand, that the property of the magnetic microcosmical work is so universal, that it sheweth the way, as well to infest the mummial spirits of man with a venomous and pernicious antipathical nature, as to extract it in its wholesome and sympathical condition, whereby it may be employed in good and salutary usages. And for that reason, namely because evil-minded persons, as well witches and sorcerers, whom the devil hath instructed in the abuse of this excellent mystery, as also wicked-minded men, I mean incarnate devils, may do great mischief in the world, by the public revelation thereof. For most men are proner unto mischief than inclined to do goodness. I think it to be the wisest part, not to name the internal microcosmical magnet openly, but only to express it in more general terms. I would have therefore each wise man to understand, that the magnetic nature, as well antipathetical as sympathetical, of all things, consisteth only in the sulphureous virtue of the vital spirits, which by reason of their incarceration, are apt to attract their like unto them, by contracting of itself from the circumference unto the center. Even so the animal, vegetable, and mineral salt, which is the immediate receptacle of this sulphurous spirit, that by reason of its pure saturnine mercurial earth, sucketh and draweth by the act of the included spirits their like from the circumference, whereby they vegerate and multiply, both in their airy volatile salt, which by a saturnine or northern condition, is like snow or frost condensed, and in their ethereal or celestial fire. And again the sulphureous spirit flieth back, or reflecteth his beams into its central salt, after it did emanate unto the circumference of the body by northern accidents, namely, by external cold, as it appeareth by the fiery or heavenly seeds included in the air, that is retained within the weather-glass, which when the north wind bloweth is contracted, by reason that the expanded spirits of the celestial sulphur, or the heavenly fire which is in it, flying from his cold opposite, betaketh itself unto the center of the air, compassing, as it were itself with a cloud, or making it a house to resist the northern blast's inclemency. For that the sulphureous equator is an enemy to the cold mercurial poles. Also in man's body, when a northern or stupid fear possesseth it, the sulphureous spirits contract themselves, and leave the external aspect pale, bluish and wan, and in so doing contract the internal spirits of the body unto the center. But this motion is antipathetical, and caused by unnatural passion. Again, those sulphureous included spirits being at liberty, they dilate and expand themselves into the open air, as having no evident magnet to attract or contract them into a narrower room. To conclude therefore, the microcosmical magnet must issue and be engendered from the microcosmical sulphureous spirits in his proper salt, which is his form, and from a more strange Mercury, which by his vicinity and propinquity is most familiar with it, and, as it were, akin unto it by adoption, and this is his passive matter. Wherefore of these two microcosmical portions, I mean, the formal and material, our secret magnet is framed, by the which the spiritual mummy is extracted out of the living man, by means whereof admirable cures and pernicious harms may be effected, as well at distance, or afar off, as near at hand, or by an immediate contact or administration. Moreover, the same internal magnet or attractive salt in man, in whose interior the sulphureous vivifying spirit doth dwell, and of whose condition and root our foresaid microcosmical magnet is, will perform the self-same salutary effects and many other rare experimental conclusions, if it be conveyed into the blood by transplantation from the alive person by an effluxion, or in the nails and hair separated from him to another subject. There is also another microcosmical magnet, which is taken from the dead man, by the means whereof the spiritual mummy may be drawn out of the living man, and applied for man's health, as well by an immediate administration, as by transplanting of it into a vegetable plant, herb, or tree, as in the progress of this book shall be more amply declared. But because the order of these things in our demonstration, a posteriori, or by progression from the effect unto the original cause of these things, will be most convenient for the common and vulgar capacity, I will begin to ascend in this mine explication from grosser elements unto more subtle, intricate, and abstruse things, as if by proportionate degrees I should mount from the earth into heaven. I purpose therefore first to express and demonstrate unto you those things magnetically, which are onely wrought by the corporal contact of two several bodies of the same natural condition. But before I will begin with the mummy, which is taken out of man's dead body, I think it in the first place most necessary to entreat of the dead carcass's mystery, that we may proceed the more methodically in our intent. Chapter 2. That there are 4 sorts of corporal mummy, whereof one only is useful and necessary for salutary purposes. In this chapter also is set down an experiment, with certain ocular demonstrations, confirming the magnetically attractive virtue of the balsamic spirits which are in the useful mummy, such as have profoundly considered and deeply respected, as well the external as internal nature of man have perceived, that the microcosmical mummy is of 2 conditions, namely, corporal or spiritual. Of the first, I purpose to speak in this present chapter, the second shall be handled hereafter, and that at large. Touching the corporal mummy, it is either naturally sympathetical or unnaturally antipathetical. We find therefore by experience that the natural mummy is only medicinable and salubrious after his due preparation, which is effected chiefly by his own magnetic property. The rest are apt to breed diseases, and to infest such persons as are in health, than to afford them any salutary relief or consolation. For, as according unto the nature of the 4 elements, there are 4 kinds of corporal and substantial mummies, so also are they distinguished according unto those elements whose natures they have endued, of the which 3 of these are corruptible, and inducers of death and sickness, namely, the earthly, the watery, and the fiery, and only that which is airy, is util to man's life, and amicable unto his nature. Concerning those 3 kinds of mummy which breed corruption, the reason why they prove corruptible is this. We must hold it first for a general axiom in philology, quod corruptum corrumpentis naturam in se inducit, that the thing corrupted doth indue the nature of the thing corrupting. As for example, if the dead carcass of a man be corrupted in the earth, it is changed and passeth into the nature of the earth, and becometh unfit for man's health, and indeed rather destructive than constructive or wholesome. Again, if the corruption be made in the water, then the corrupted flesh or dead body will acquire or endure a waterish and massoluginous disposition, which also will prove very incommodious or unprofitable, for the conservation of the vital spirits. And lastly, by the inordinate violence of fire, the spirits in the mummial body will be consumed, wasted, or expired. Now the reason why these said corporal mummies in those estates are inconvenient for the conservation of health is, because the foresaid 3 do so destroy and corrupt the body of them, that they make and constrain his earth, his water, and his fire to return unto their first matter, so that whereas the earth and the water are ordained to be the receptacles of 2 vivifying elements, namely, of fire and air, which only can be conserved in a body that is incorrupted, it must of necessity follow, that in the 3 foresaid mummies, those vivifying spirits must needs vanish and fly away, for want of a natural body, which is now become corrupted and destroyed, and therefore unnatural. Seeing therefore nothing is required in the true mummy, more than that which is apt and proper for the conservation of life, yea, for life itself, which is the air which is banished and expelled. From the 3 foresaid mummies, therefore nothing can be extracted out of them but sickness, death, and destruction, and consequently antipathetical effects. For that a sound, murdered, or strangled body do rot under the earth or in the water, it is not fit or proper for the wholesome use of man's body. The very selfsame regard is to be had unto such bodies, as die through infirmities and diseases, and although they are not visibly corrupted by the 3 foresaid external elements, yet nevertheless it happeneth so, that a certain invisible corruptible influence and impression is made or caused from the external elements into the internal. From hence therefore proceedeth that intestine war in man's body, whereby the elements do kill and corrupt one another, but after a divers fashion, namely, otherwise in one body than in another, according as one element or elemental alteration is said to have dominion or rule over the other. And this is the reason that such variety of diseases do haunt man's body, as for example the dropsy cometh of the strong impression of water, the hectic or burning fever of fiery insolations, and the leprosy of the dominion of earth and sea. And therefore also, where any such elementary corruption happeneth unto the body, there the wholesome spirit of the corporal mummy, with his habitable or dwelling mansion, is utterly overthrown, and the spirit is forced to depart, and consequently contrary mummial spirits do domineer, and are ready to operate antipathetically, as shall be expressed in the 2nd member of this book. But if the sound body, that is, not having any infirmity, be killed only by and in the element of air, that is to say, through strangling or by hanging, then there will be found no impression of the foresaid elements in the corporal mass of man's carcass. and for that reason it will remain uncorrupted, and will not suffer any elemental resolution, so long as it is conserved in the air. If therefore the body or tabernacle of the spirits and vital balsam remaineth entire, then that aerial vital balsam is not compelled to depart from his lodging, so long as the body is not resolved by nature or art. But if it be resolved, then it will forsake the body, as the soul doth, as also the animal astral spirit, which did reconcile the one with the other. But the vital, vegetable, and balsamic spirit remaineth in the uncorrupted body. It followeth therefore, that this airy kind of microcosmical mummy is most proper for the conservation of vital spirits in the living man, being extracted, prepared, and rightly after preparation to be applied. I will therefore come briefly unto our magnetical experiences touching this mummial subject. Depart, and consequently contrary mummial spirits do domineer, and are ready to operate antipathetically, as shall be expressed in the second member of this book. But if the sound body, that is, not having any infirmity, be killed only by and in the element of air, that is to say, through strangling or by hanging, then there will be found no impression of the foresaid elements in the corporal mass of man's carcass, and for that reason it will remain uncorrupted, and will not suffer any elemental resolution so long as it is conserved in the air. If therefore the body or tabernacle of the spirits and vital balsam remaineth entire, then that aerial vital balsam is not compelled to depart from his lodging, so long as the body is not resolved by nature or art. But if it be resolved, then it will forsake the body, as the soul doth, as also the animal astral spirit, which did reconcile the one with the other. But the vital, vegetable, and balsamic spirit remaineth in the uncorrupted body. It followeth therefore, that this airy kind of microcosmical mummy is most proper for the conservation of vital spirits in the living man, being extracted, prepared, and rightly after preparation to be applied. I will therefore come briefly unto our magnetical experiences touching this mummial subject. The proposition: if this salutary kind of airy mummy, with his vehicle or magnetical instrument, be taken or chosen or selected rightly, it will induce, by reason of the absence of actual life and the dominion of cold, the condition of the northern pole, and consequently by that reason, those airy included spirits which were, whilst the body was living, of an hot equinoctial nature, and therefore more dilative from the center to the circumference than attractive, are now by death made to act from the circumference to the center, if they be excited by their like spirits which are equinoctial and lively. And then they become attractive of the equinoctial mummy, namely by contracting themselves into the center, and consequently this airy microcosmical mummy must be endued with the magnetical property of the northern pole, and therefore by a contractual application of it to his like the living man, it will suck and attract greedily his like nature, and having drawn it in will retain it, so that it may by a due preparation be made sympathetical, and reduced into a singular medicine for man's health and conservation. Or it may be so contaminated and made antipathetical with the impure and infectious mummy of the infirm living creature, that it may free the infirm, by extracting out the poison which did infect it, and infect a wholesome and sound body, unto the which it shall be given inwardly. An experiment upon this, I collected a portion of this northern mummy, namely of the flesh of a man strangled in the air, in which the spiritual mummy was centrally contracted by cold, and I applied it typically unto the part of my body which was nearest unto it in natural position. I found it in the contact passing cold, and as it were ice and northern. After it had remained on a certain time, I found that in the exciting of his frozen and northernly contracted spirits, by the equinoctial heat of my body, they drew off my mummial and vivifying spirits greedily, and at some times, and as it were by fits, I felt them in their magnetic operation sensibly, and after a kind of dolorous fashion, to rug and pull some adjacent parts close about it. In conclusion, after a certain time I took it off and found it much altered in smell and view, by reason of the quantity of my spirits which they attracted unto them, both which mummial spirits, so magnetically congregated together, I extracted and prepared after my manner for the use of mine own body. But because my assertion will perchance be of little credit, I will prove the sensibility of it and probability of every particle or member hereof by many and sundry examples or demonstrations. First demonstration or proof, made by a relation unto the microcosmical nature, to prove and demonstrate that the airy spirit of the microcosmi is apt to take any polar impression, as well as the air of the macrocosm, and by consequence is more magnetical or attractive in his northern or cold property than in his equinoctial or southern habit. Look considerately upon the air included in the weather glass, which served as a Catholic demonstration unto my precedent philosophy, and you shall see that when the equinoctial, namely the eastern and southern winds do blow in the air, the particular included air, and therefore the universal element of air excluded, is less magnetic or attractive than when the northern winds do blow. The proof is made evident, because that when those winds do blow, the external air, and therefore the internal, is more apt to be dilated by reason of the emanation of the sulphureous or celestial spirits, which are included in each airy spirit, from the center unto the circumference, making thereby a certain expulsion, or rather expansion of airy parts, by rarefying of the body of it. And therefore it is observed in the instrument, not to draw the water higher than the figure 1, but to repel it down lower. Contrariwise, when the northern winds blow, the dilated and mobile air is by attraction or condensation contracted into immobile snow, that is to say, into an earthly condition, so that we see that the air in this estate is admirably contractive, as it is expressed to the life, in the demonstrative instrument or weather glass, for the included spirit attracteth the ponderous water upward, and contracteth itself out of a large room or place, into a narrow angle or space, as it appeareth when the northern snow and frosts have had long dominion in the microcosmical world, by a northern breath, at which time we shall find the water against his nature, to be sucked up unto the upper figure 7. The reason whereof I have shewed you before, namely because the occult sulphureous nature or spirit which is the son of light, and the actor in life, being carried in his airy vehicle fleeth from the persecuting cold, which is his adversary, and armeth itself about in the center, with a condensed air, to hinder or break the universal assault of cold, which is the imp of darkness, and therefore hath his seat at the pole, which is furthest off from the presence of the sun. In like manner the dead and cold mummial spirits being for this reason centrally contracted, and as it were mortified and congealed by application of it to lively spirits, as the cold northern air, or spirit unto the equinoctial or southern sun then reviving, and incited by the living man's contactual or contiguous presence do greedily draw them in, as imploring their aid against their cold adversary, and having the possession of them seemeth better satisfied. I will prove this to be so by this demonstrative example, taken from the lodestone. Second demonstration, that the dead spirits in a body will not attract unto them dead spirits, nor that lively spirits in a body will not suck unto them magnetically lively spirits, but very moderately it is argued by the operation of the lodestone in this manner. Problem 1. The southern pole of one lodestone doth with a certain hatred fly from, and eschew the southern pole of another, and will by no means be joined together in friendship, but avoideth by a natural antipathy the contact of one another. But if the northern pole of the one be applied unto the southern pole of the other, they will stick and cleave together by a strong attraction, as for example, take a lodestone with his distinct poles, namely his austral and boreal pole being marked out, put it into a little vessel or boat to float in a basin, or cistern, or tub of water, in such a manner that the two poles thereof be disposed unto the plane of the horizon, then hold in your hand another lodestone, whose poles are well known unto you, so that the south pole of that in your hand be directed to the north of that which floateth, the two not being far from one another, and you shall find that the boat will follow your hand whithersoever it moveth, and will not leave until it cleaveth unto it. But if contrariwise you shall offer or apply the north pole of that in your hand unto the north pole of that in the boat, or the south pole of the one unto the south pole of the other, you shall perceive that the one stone will by his aspect drive away the other, and the little bark will forthwith turn from it, as if the helm thereof were moved another way. Application. Even so the northern natured mummy will not at all, or but weakly, operate on his like, nor the southern or hot lively flesh on his like. But contrary poles will act, and by a magnic virtue will be united unto one another, by the attractive faculty of the northern, or cold dead man's flesh or blood, which coveteth by a secret instinct the hot nature of the equinoctial south. Third demonstration, touching the fortification and augmentation of spirits in the dead and impotent, or northern mummy, by the contact of the southern or lively mummy or flesh. It is magnetically maintained to be possible and probable, by this problematical demonstration, which proveth that the northern magnet or airy mummy is exalted in his power by the southern. Problem 2. The stronger magnet or lodestone, and the bigger in quantity, doth augment the force of the lesser, as also of iron by putting the lesser magnet upon the pole of the greater, so that the northern pole will become stronger in his attraction. As for example, a piece of iron being put on the pole of the lesser stone in that position, it will hold it up perpendicularly on the north point A, which on the pole B, will no way be affected. Gilbert, Liber 2, De Magnetic, caput 25, Vede Ridley, caput 84. In like manner the northern mummy, by the conjunction of it unto the southern nature, is exalted in strength, and sucketh new spirits and vigor unto it, by drawing power from the stronger, and so leaving the stronger weaker, which is better proved by this third problem. Problem 3. If two magnets, armed by two iron steely teeth apiece, be set before you, the one being strong, the other weak or much less, whose axis or diameter between the teeth are equal, and of a like length, then set the teeth of these together, that come from contrary poles and parts, and the stronger will apprehend and lift up the weaker, and the weaker being united and incorporated with the stronger, by the virtue that it receiveth from the stronger, will lift up from the ground, and retain the stronger and greater very firmly, although he be much heavier than the weight the small stone doth ordinarily lift up. Application. Even so the weaker or northern mummy being lesser in quantity, will gather force, and multiply spirits, by his faculty of attraction from the stronger and bigger mass of the southern or lively mummy. Lastly, that by the application of this dead, northern or congealed mummy unto the lively southern or equinoctial mummy. The most evident and strangest attraction proceedeth from the northern mummy. It is manifested by this example in the lodestone. Problem 4. There is a magnetical attraction from the equator of the lodestone, but far different from that of the northern pole, both in violence and in manner of attraction, for the equinoctial attraction is more naturally mild, as if it were a mean betwixt the two poles. And yet in substance all is but one earth, though various in formal execution, as for example, the erection of a piece of iron will be the less perpendicular, and the attraction will be the weaker, by how much the nearer it approacheth from the pole unto the equinoctial. Again, all that have written the magnetical history, do ascribe the greatest force of attraction unto the northern pole of the magnet, as shall also hereafter be declared and proved more at large. I will conclude with a demonstration taken from the like mummy of beasts, and it is this, the fourth demonstration, which is animal. It is a common thing, and vulgarly in use, to take a piece of raw beef, and apply it unto the nape of the neck, to draw away rheums or defluxions out of the eyes. And I was informed by one of credit and learning, that when a simple fellow that was troubled with sore and watering eyes was counseled to apply raw beef behind in his neck, to draw back and divert the humor, he, mistaking the business, applied the raw cold beef upon both his eyes, and it was his bad chance that it attracted so strongly, that instead of drawing out the rheum, it pulled forth his eye holes. Also, a worthy gentlewoman of mine acquaintance had raw beef applied unto her neck, for to divert the rheum from her eyes, but she confessed that it drew so strongly unto it that she felt her eyes as it were sucked or drawn into her head, and will not be persuaded to this day but that her eyes are deeper in her head than they were. Whereby it is argued that by far greater reason the experiment above mentioned is in every respect demonstrated to be true, being the magnet of it is composed of subtle air, mummial spirits coagulated by an internal and central virtue in the magnetical mass. Another relative animal demonstration. A nobleman of Bohemia named Burgravius did use for his gout this medicine. He took a piece of beef, and did moisten it a little with wine, and laid it on the place affected, renewing the same medicine every 6 hours space, and it drew forth a great deal of filthy and sordid matter. And if afterward the same flesh be given to be eaten of dogs, it will infect them with the same gouty disease as it did the man. And this was tried upon a couple of that lord's dogs, as Hans Tanker, the minister of the Lord Hoffman, did relate it from the said Burgravius' own mouth, and also he himself saw it affected on a dog. If this gross mass of magnetical stuff in its simple nature could draw so strongly unto it, much more should our faith be grounded on a more spiritual and airy animal mummy, or mummial magnet, which I know but am not disposed at this time, neither do I think it fit in this place openly to reveal or to express either its manner of preparation or diversity in usage, because by the abuse thereof, wicked and naughty-minded persons may do as much harm thereby in inducing of diseases, as the honest physician may do good in expelling or curing of them. A third of Mr. Cotton's dog. A fourth relative animal demonstration. It is esteemed to be an excellent magnetical cure in the plague, when the sore or carbuncle doth appear, to take a dried toad, macerated in vinegar, and afterward to apply it to the infected place of the body, for it is reported to suck or draw the venom to it strongly. This hath been often tried, and it may be proved, by reason that the toad is magnetically attractive, and diuretic, partly because of her cold venom, and boreal, dull and heavy or melancholy disposition, and then forasmuch as it is observed to stench blood. So that this gross and terrestrial nomus magnet performeth his office, in attracting from the botch or carbuncle his like, though not so subtilly and spiritually, as the elementary or airy northern mummy doth from the lively or southern-natured man. I could tell you of many vegetables, which have a magnetic property, to suck and draw unto them, being applied unto the soles of the feet, or pulses of the wrists or arms, for divers aguish distempers. But that I should in so doing prove perchance too tedious unto you, and therefore I will proceed unto the second degree of the magnetical virtue in the mummy, which is to draw or suck unto it his like, not by contact or touch only, but at distance, and that by a spiritual attraction in the air, and at an unknown longitude, as shall better appear in these chapters following. Chapter 3rd. How by relation of natural things unto one another, they do, after that a corporal contact or touch is made betwixt them, operate wonderfully, and that by a magnetical consent or spiritual continuity, both after a contact or touch is made. In the curing of maladies or wasting his like by a mutual operation at an unknown distance, I will proceed as I began, from a general proposition unto diversities of experiences, the which afterwards I will prove sensible and possible by divers demonstrative relations. The proposition. It is possible that two mummies of opposite condition, that is to say the one being of a deadly boreal condition, and the other of a lively and southern, or equinoctial property, may, after a corporal contact made betwixt them, operate from one to another a far distance, by a spiritual relation which is continued between them, as well antipathically as sympathetically. Experiment to confirm the same. An Italian lord by an accident had his nose cut off, and by the counsel of his physician made a wound in one of his slave's arms, and clapped his mutilated nose unto it. and so continued it until a perfect union was made betwixt the flesh of the slave and his master. Afterwards a gobbet of the slave's flesh which cleaved to the nose was cut out and formed into the shape of a nose. The servant's wound was healed up, and for his painful service during this exploit was manumitted or freed, and with store of money in his purse went unto Naples, which was above 100 miles from the place where his master remained, who adopted flesh on his nose, prospered and did nourish from the veins, so long as the man which was made free did live. It came to pass that the manumitted person did die at Naples, and thereupon immediately the adopted flesh unto the master's nose did decay, and began to gangrene, insomuch that if he had not cut it off, it would have marred all the rest and killed him. This relation is known to be so true and certain, that to this day it is famous over all Italy and in every man's mouth of that country, and testified by some German writers, and maintained as well by some Scotch as Englishmen, which have been in that country. By this history therefore we may see, that so long as the two bodies which made contact were of one disposition, namely southern or equinoctial, they, though being in body far remote from one another, did operate spiritually, and were present in spirit, that is, they did concur together with the aspect of their sympathetical beams, and the flesh was spiritually vivised from the slave's lively fountain, even as the grain of wheat hath his nourishment, and viviseth by the application of the sun's beams unto it. But when the southern, or equinoctial, or lively property of the bondman's spirit was changed into a deadly northern and cold disposition, then the vivifying spirit did cease to apply any more unto the adopted flesh, and in lieu of it, the deadly northern spirit did suck or draw away that which the southern had bestowed upon it, no otherwise than the northern frost in the world killeth and draweth out another, did operate spiritually, and were present in spirit, that is, they did concur together with the aspect of their sympathetical beams, and the flesh was spiritually vivised from the slave's lively fountain, even as the grain of wheat hath his nourishment, and viviseth by the application of the sun's beams unto it. But when the southern, or equinoctial, or lively property of the bondman's spirit was changed into a deadly northern and cold disposition, then the vivifying spirit did cease to apply any more unto the adopted flesh, and in lieu of it, the deadly northern spirit did suck or draw away that which the southern had bestowed upon it, no otherwise than the northern frost in the world killeth, and draweth out the life of the grain, or seed, or plant, or herb, by his contractive and boreal property. And for this cause the gangrene, which is a northern disease, did take the borrowed portion of flesh on the nose. Here therefore we see how the same spirit altered from a southern or equinoctial unto a northern condition, operatec by a contrary and unnatural and depriving means, and that secretly and afar off. First, a corollary demonstration taken from the macrocosm. We see in the weather glass that between the bolt's head and the place of the water, to wit, in the whole pipe of the mattress, there is an invisible airy spirit, which though it be not seen of itself, yet doth it operate visibly in effect, for if the external air be very hot, then it dilateth the air included in the bolt's head, whereby the water at the other end is observed to sink down, though no ocular agent may be found, but by intellectual eyes we may discern, that it is done through the virtue and lively emanation of sulphurous light in the air, by the secret emission of whose beams, the air is rarefied, and by rarefaction beateth the water downward, and contrariwise by northern cold the water is lift up through the contraction of the emitted spirits, so that we may discern how lively emanations, and consequently acting and vivifying spirits, are sent forth from the lively and microcosmical fountain unto the creatures, which are apt to animate and vivify. But if the fountain become cold and icy, in lieu of a southern acting addition of life, it induceth a mortifying and privative subtraction, and that, as you may perceive in the weather glass, by a spiritual concurrence, or rather an invisible and insensible continuity, which is between both extremes, as you may easily see it demonstrated in the weather glass. Second, a demonstration derived from the lodestone's property. If we shall take an oval lodestone, namely, and shall divide it in the middle, namely in the equinoctial about B-C, and then shall expose the part A, B, into his little vessel to float on the water, and also put the other half C, D in another little boat, or vessel in the same water, we shall find that these two halves B, C, being of one equinoctial nature, will desire to be joined again together, and to be reduced into the same continuity it was before. And for that reason, the spirit which is continued between them, though the body be divided, being invisibly united unto both divided portions, doth direct them both, and by an actual emanation out of each of them, attract, suck, and agglutinate as it were each of them in their natural position, as they were before. Application. By this therefore the continuation of spirits betwixt the flesh of the forementioned captive at Naples, and that which the master borrowed remaining elsewhere, is evidently argued and confirmed. And though it may be alleged that the lodestone doth not draw without his orbe, yet I say, that though men do guess at the sensible attraction of weights, yet can they not limit the penetrating action which is between magnetic bodies, as I have proved in my precedent book, and will hereafter demonstrate it more at large. A progression in the foresaid magnetical demonstration. But contrariwise, if we shall attempt to apply the equinoctial or southern place of the division in the lodestone C unto the pole A in their barks thus, the one will fly from the other, and be contrary unto the other, for in so doing, nature will be perverted, and the form of the stone disturbed. Therefore this flight from one another, or hatred between them, ariseth from the evil position or application of natures, discording in their genuine order, which stir up an intestine war, hatred, or antipathy between the parts, and cause a contrariety or distortion of spirits. Application, by which it appeareth that the equinoctial spirit of the late living captive, being turned northern or boreal, will in no wise accord with the southern nature of the yet living adopted or borrowed flesh, which is possessed by the master as it did before, but proveth antipathetical and destructive unto it, that is, it warreth with a contrary property against it, being that now it as fast withdraweth the beams of his spirits from the circumference unto the center, namely, from the flesh lent unto the master, as, whilst it lived, it did send them after an equinoctial manner, forth from the center unto the circumference, namely, from the live fountain in the captive, unto the like in the master. Third demonstration, taken from the lodestone. It is evident also, that the needle touched with the lodestone will aspect the lodestone at any position, whilst the lodestone is strong and lively, but when the lodestone is dead, or that he have lost his virtue by the fire, the property of the needle will also die. A second experiment, confirming the foresaid proposition. Against the time that I was to read my public anatomy in the college, I had a certain body of one that was hanged, to be anatomized at my house privately, at which time I was solicited by Mr. Kellett the apothecary, to permit a gentlewoman, who had a serous tumor in her belly, to be touched and stroked with the dead man's hand, because experience had taught it to be very efficacious, for the abolishing of the like horrid protuberation in others as they averred. The gentlewoman with her husband and brother came unto my house, and as they desired, things were effected. Within a while after the apothecary, with the gentlewoman's husband, came to give me thanks for that courtesy, assuring me that it had done his wife good, and taken away the tumorous swelling. Now this doth shew how the contact of this northern mummy in the dead man's hand did cause the southerly growing and vegetating tumor, which did more and more send out its beams from the center to the circumference, to decrease and diminish, and caused it to rot and moulder away by the central continuation or union of the northern spirit in the dead, with that which did vegetate unnaturally in the living, and that at a far distance. A third experiment, to express the self-same effect. It is evident, and often approved by common people, that if warts be rubbed with a piece of fresh beef, and the said beef be conveyed into a field, and buried under the earth, that as the beef wasteth and rotteth in the earth, so will the warts languish and pine away. In like manner it hath been oft observed, that if a piece of bacon be rubbed on warts, and afterwards be nailed on a post against the sun, as the bacon doth waste and diminish, so also will the warts fade and waste away. Also a dead body's hand touching warts, they will die. Whereby is evidently proved that as things are sympathetically maintained in their being, that is to say, in their increase or vegetation, so also, by an antipathical aspect, or spiritual continuity, between two remote natures, after a corporal contact is made between them, whereof the one is boreal, the other southern or equinoctial, the one which touched, will cause it to fade and vanish, after the nature of the toucher. So that as the northern property is an enemy unto life, and southern heat, so by his contact it causeth unnaturally growing things to fade away by a like property, in changing the vegetating nature of the thing touched, into his decreasing, contracting, and mortifying nature. The experimental glass doth teach us, that the action of cold is quite contrary unto that of heat, in one and the same spirit, and Scripture tells us, that the self-same word in his southern property doth undo and destroy the snow and ice, which it did make in his northern condition. Chapter 4th. How certain excrementitious parts, taken from the infirm member of the animal, and transplanted into a vegetable or growing tree, hath a spiritual relation or continuity with the spirit of the sick and impotent member, and consequently of the sick creature. I will for the better method's cause express in the frontispiece of this chapter a proposition, as I have done in the precedent. The proposition, the magnetical force of the spiritual mummy doth dwell and act even in the excrementitious or superfluous excrescences of any member of man's body. After that they are separated from it, and transplanted into some convenient magnetical vegetable or plant, so that by a secret emanation from them, or application unto the beam of the member, from whence they were cut or derived, and consequently by a continued spiritual relation which is had between them, and the body or member from whence they were extracted, they are able, by the magnetical plant's assistance, to operate vegetatively upon the same defective dolorous decayed limb or member at an unlimited distance. The first experimental history. My mathematical master, excellent for his knowledge in the art of engineering, did assure me that if any one had a withered or consumed member, as a dried arm, leg, or foot, or such like, and if he did cut from that member, be it foot or army, the nails, hair, and scrapings of the skin, and shall pierce a willow tree with an auger or wimble unto the pith, and after that shall thrust in those pared nails cut hair on c into the hole, and stop the hole close with a peg or pin made of the same wood, observing withal, that this action must be effected, when the moon is increasing, and the good planets in such multiplying signs, as is Gemini, and Saturn, who is a great dryer, be depressed, the limbe so wasted, shall by little and little revegetate again, even as the tree shall daily increase, grow and flourish. Also he did aver unto me, that I should find the self-same effect, if I did put those excrements into a hole, made in the root of a hazel tree, and close up again the hole with the bark of the same tree, and afterward cover it with earth, assuring me, that it hath been tried, that as the tree groweth so will the member prosper. But above all he wished me to observe the due order of the heaven, and such secret and proper constellations, as he hath instructed me in, for without them, the cure or amendments will be the less effectual. Johannes Romelius Pharamondus cureth the gout by the very self-same manner of transplantation in this manner. He cutteth off the hair from the feet, legs, and thighs, and also he pareth off the nails of the feet. Then he maketh a hole in an oak, even unto the very center or pith of the body, and pulleth into it the hair and the nails, and afterward he stoppeth up the hole with a peg or pin, framed out of the same tree, and lastly, he daubereth it without with cow dung. This author saith, that by this magnetical experiment onely he hath cured many, but if it chance that the gout shall for all this return again, within the space of 3 months, then it is an argument that the oak is insufficient to draw magnetically, and then he proceedeth thus, namely he boreth another like hole in a second oak, and after this he taketh the pieces of the oak, which fall out in the boring of the hole, and bruiseth them, and stitcheth them in a little bag, and applieth it unto the dolorous or infected member. And this he doth 3 days before the new moon. Then in that very hour that the new moon is in, he removeth the bag from the part affected, and thrusteth it into the hole of the same tree, and stoppeth it with a pin of the same wood as before. And he affirmeth, that by this second practice when the first hath failed, he hath cured many. But if it happen for all this, that the pain doth return within 3 other months, then he cureth off the hair, and pareth the nails the second time, and tieth them upon the back of a crab or crabfish, and so casteth it into the running waters. Johannes Romelius Pharamondus cureth the gout by the very self-same manner of transplantation in this manner. He cutteth off the hair from the feet, legs, and thighs, and also he pareth off the nails of the feet. Then he maketh a hole in an oak, even unto the very center or pith of the body, and pulleth into it the hair and the nails, and afterward he stoppeth up the hole with a peg or pin, framed out of the same tree, and lastly, he daubereth it without with cow dung. This author saith, that by this magnetical experiment onely he hath cured many, but if it chance that the gout shall for all this return again, within the space of 3 months, then it is an argument that the oak is insufficient to draw magnetically, and then he proceedeth thus, namely he boreth another like hole in a second oak, and after this he taketh the pieces of the oak, which fall out in the boring of the hole, and bruiseth them, and stitcheth them in a little bag, and applieth it unto the dolorous or infected member. And this he doth 3 days before the new moon. Then in that very hour that the new moon is in, he removeth the bag from the part affected, and thrusteth it into the hole of the same tree, and stoppeth it with a pin of the same wood as before. And he affirmeth, that by this second practice when the first hath failed he hath cured many, but if it happen for all this, that the pain doth return within 3 other months, then he cureth off the hair and pareth the nails the second time, and tieth them upon the back of a crab or crabfish, and so casteth it into the running waters, and the sick will be cured. He concludes there that he has cured many by the first, many others by the first and second, and many by the first, second, and third experiments. A third experiment tried by the same author. The same author verifies that by this very manner of transplantation, he has cured many of the rupture or hernia, and his practice is as follows. He takes a newly laid egg, piping hot, and he rubs the gouty place with it often but gently. Then he takes away the bark of a good big tree, and with a great auger, he bores a hole so big that the egg might easily enter into it. Then he lays the bark on again as before, stopping the hole thoroughly, and anointing or daubing it with tree wax or cement. All these matters must be done in due order and time. And he tells us that when the barks of the tree do grow together, then also will the hernia and rupture also close up. But if it happen that the hernia be not cured within 1 month, then bore a hole in an oak, and take the pieces that fall from the hole, bruise them, and stick them in a small bag, and apply it to the grief as is said, about 3 days before the new moon, and then about the hour of the new moon, put it into the hole, and do in all things as is told you before. He telleth many other observations as well touching the time, namely, if the hernia's first increase were in the moon's increase or decrease, which for brevity's sake I here omit. Lastly, if the hernia be not for all this soldered or glued up, then he boreth a hole in the oak, and puts in the nail and hair of the patient's hands and feet, also the hair of his privy parts, stopping it as is before said. For he affirmeth that when the hole will be grown up, the hernia will be also closed. There also he sheweth the reason, that he is forced to use more or less of these operations in his cure. According unto the nature of the hernia, namely to the incipient hernia one operation will serve, to the inveterate more will be required. And he saith, that in this cure is chiefly to be observed the time, the measure of the tree, and the depth or profundity of the hole. Also he saith, that if we take the nails of the feet and hands of an hydropic person, and transplant them on the crayfish of the river, and bind them unto the back of her, and cast her into the river, it will cure the dropsy. Whereby you may plainly observe by approved experience, that the marrow and strength of the foresaid proposition is in every respect confirmed. And again, if we do but burn the nails and hair and scrapings of the skin, and take by an alembic without a bottom the fume of it, we shall find a kind of balsamic oil to issue from them, which is very attractive, drying and agglutinating of wounds. And therefore it appeareth, that there is a balsamic virtue in these kind of excrescences, though unto the ignorant they appear but of little value. But this magnetic virtue of these excrementitious parts may, in some sort, be also demonstrated by the property of the mineral lodestone. As for example, fourth, a Macrocosmicall demonstration, we may rightly compare the mass of these superfluous excrescences unto a lesser lodestone capped with steel. For when it is transplanted into the plant, it becometh of a greater force of attraction, for as the iron being added unto the pole of the lodestone, though it be but weak, yet it doth fortify it and maketh it able to attract a far greater weight, for the iron giveth it strength. In like manner, if magnetic excrescences be grafted in the body of the magnetical tree, then that tree will suck and draw his like, namely the spirit of defective limbs more strongly unto it, making them to become vegetative, and to increase and grow, which before did pine and wither, for the spirit sucked and continued by dilatation from the member unto the vegetative nature of the tree, doth induce the like nature, and doth by a continuity animate the fading spirits in the member, to increase and vegetate or prosper in his growth. Now to prove this magnetical relation, I will produce certain problems, touching the nature of the lodestone. 1. Problem. There is a strong union in a lodestone, armed with steel, and heavier weight may be by it taken up, than if it be not armed. Application. The reason is, because vis unita est fortior, for the iron addeth force unto a lodestone that is weak, as is confirmed by this problem. 2. Problem. If there be a thin plate of steel or iron held or fastened under the nether pole of the lodestone, between the lodestone and the weight, then the magnet will lift up double, and sometimes decuple, or 10 times so much again. And from this practice came the capping or arming of the adamant with steel or iron, after divers manners. Application. By the like correlation, if that the animal magnet be armed with a vegetable power, it will more forcibly attract unto it spirits from the greater animal magnet, or rather, the animal iron. Also this problem following is worthily to be noted. 3. Problem. Every body unto the which the lively mummy of another man is administered or drunk up, doth forthwith become a magnet, and will be armed to attract his like. Application. And therefore the lively mummy of the decaying member, being in part included in the nails and hair thereof, and afterward conveyed into the vegetable body, that vegetable body which receiveth them, is made forthwith magnetical, and draweth to it the spirits of the member, and doth impart unto them of his vegetable power. And also the magnetic mummy in the hair and nails, though of themselves they are but weak, yet are they made more strong and forcible, by being planted in a stronger magnetic vegetable, so that the one doth fortify and enable the other. This is demonstrated by this problem. 4. Problem. A weak magnet being rubbed at one of the poles of a stronger, will be bettered by it in his vigor and virtue. Demonstration. Also set a magnet of small force that can be perceived, upon a lodestone of a good strength and vigor, especially upon the poles, and he will shew a vigor, as if he were as strong as the stronger stone is, whereunto he is united. Application. So by the like reason, we may transplant the superfluous excrescences in which there appeareth but a small signy of any magnetic virtue, upon a stronger vegetable magnet or magnetical plant, and especially in his pith or axle tree, and he will shew forth a magnetic vigor, equal unto that of the plant which appeareth in this, namely, because it doth direct by his beams the vegetable power, unto the decayed member. Now that the reference between the tree and the member is caused by a spiritual continuity, it is made plain by this magnetical problem. 5. Problem. If a long iron be conjoined unto the pole of the lodestone, and unto the end of this another be laid, and at the end of that a third, and so forward, the adamant will, by virtue of his beamy emanating spirit, hold them all, or most of them, according unto the vigor thereof, all touching one another, and cleaving together like a linked chain. Application. Whereby it is evident, that as the spirit of the lodestone is continuate, and by his continuity is apt to fasten and join bodies in a union, from his center unto his spiritual circumference, even so, by the emanation from the double magnet united in one, from their center unto the weak line or member, there is caused and engendered a continual succession of vegetation in it, by degrees. Now that two magnets uniting their forces in one, do emit a more vigorous emanation, and are endued with a greater magnetical force, it is proved in the second problem of the third demonstration of the second chapter, before mentioned. Chapter 5. Herein is proved that vegetables contain in themselves magnetical spirits, by means whereof they do sensibly attract, as well from the animal as vegetable and mineral kingdom, and it is first expressed by 2 propositions and maintained by divers experimental demonstrations. The first proposition: there is a magnetical virtue as well in the vegetable as in the animal and mineral, which doth operate and act attractively, both on his like in the vegetable, and also in the animal and mineral. The first experimental demonstration. The experience hereof is manifold, and by that which hath been related in the precedent chapter, that the magnetical relation or union which is made between the vegetable and the animal is sufficiently expressed, and shall be more at large enucleated hereafter. Again, if one that hath an ague do take the herb called ebereus, namely, a handful thereof, and put it into either of his shoes, and walketh upon it until he wax very hot, he will find that it will draw a great deal of waterish matter downward and cure the ague. But saith my master that taught me, it is not to be cast in the way that man or beast doth pass, for the animal that treadeth on it will be infected and be aguish. This Christopher Schutzen, a German, did affirm that he had tried this and found it to be true. 2 Experiment. Joannes Carfanianus delivereth it for a truth, that warts are taken away out of the hands and other places, by taking of straws, and cutting the knots in them, and he prepareth in that manner 2 for every wart, and the straws must be of a finger's length, which being thus prepared, you must put 2 sections of the knots in this fashion upon every wart, so that the nodes touch directly the warts, and they must strongly be pressed down, and this must be done unto every wart with a double straw, as is already said. Then take those straws and dig a hole under a spout or gutter, and cover it with a stone, and you shall find that as the straws do rot, so also will the warts consume away. 3. Experimental demonstration. Mr. Balthazar Wagner saith that he hath often tried this magnetical cure in the inflammation and redness of the eyes most true. He taketh the root of the common mallow, when the sun is in the middle of Virgo, and applieth it backward unto the nuke or nape of the neck, binding it fast thereunto, averring that it will attract and draw unto it with efficacy all the cause of the redness. 4. Experimental demonstration. As there is a kind of lodestone called evax, which Pliny doth affirm to have a magnetical power to attract flesh unto it, so also in another place he telleth us that there is another kind of magnetic stone, called sarda, which hath a property to draw wood unto it so strongly, that they cannot be separated from one another, except the wood be cut off from it. But leaving these things as uncredible, I will relate unto you that mutual love and sympathetical affection which hath been found between the vegetable and the mineral. Experimental demonstration. There are divers men which do work in the mines in Germany, of which a couple were employed about the silver mines in Wales, who do use to gather at a due season a forked rod of the hazel tree, and holding in either hand one of the 2 twigs in such manner, that the part where the fork beginneth to be perpendicular, etc. There is so great a sympathy between this vegetable and the mine, if it be rich, that the man that marcheth on the hill where the mine is, and holdeth this hazel rod in this posture, shall presently perceive the top or perpendicular of the rod to incline violently downward, when the man treadeth on a place where any mine is, which is an evident argument of the magnetical affection, which is between the one and the other. 6. Experiment. A man that hath many boils in his body was counselled by an old woman to find out a bramble which groweth out of the earth at both ends, or both ends rooted in the ground, and this man was counselled to creep in his clothes under the bramble backwards 3 times, and he was cured. So his boils vanished by little and little in 5 or 6 days. Mr. Fuller. LL. 2. Proposition. The singular order and sympathy or antipathy of the vegetable parts between themselves is described and typically set forth by a relation or respect had between it and the lodestone, whereby is argued that the vegetable and mineral, and consequently the animal, observe one sympathetical or harmonical proportion, as well in their sympathetical order as antipathetical irregularity in their disorder. A problem for the confirmation of the foresaid proposition. In all magnetical things, be they vegetable or mineral, and consequently animal, evermore nature doth tend unto a convenient unity, both in nature and position, and contrariwise where their parts do not according unto the course of nature incline unto a conjunction, there happeneth a disturbance, and as it were a diversity between part and part. Demonstration in the mineral magnet. Take a long lodestone or mineral magnet, and let it be CD, and let C be the north pole, B and D the south A, then divide this long lodestone in the middle between the 2 poles, where the equator passeth, namely in E, F and E, will be south or equinoctial unto the pole D, and F, unto the pole C. As therefore these parts of the lodestone did respect one another in their entire disposition, so also nature tendeth after their division to unite them again. And therefore where the division is made, the end E desireth and coveteth to cleave and adhere unto F, but E will not be joined, or have any commerce with D, nor yet F with C, and then one must convert C unto D, and they will well agree and be combinated together. For D turneth to the south as before, and C to the north, but E and F, which should be parts naturally conjoined and united in the stone, are in so doing mightily displaced, so that they do not accord and unite together by a material union, but they receive their motion and inclination from the form of the stone, so that the ends of this stone, whether they are disjoined or united, do magnetically tend after one manner unto the poles of the earth, both in its first entire and divided figure, as in the second, and the magnetical concourse Fe, in the second figure into one body, will be as perfect as that of Cd, even as it was engendered in his vein, and Fe as the float in their boat. Application unto the vegetable. This selfsame conveniency and inconveniency of the magnetical form, which is noted to be in the mineral magnet, will also be observed in vegetables. For take a wand or rod of a willow tree, or any other plant which groweth easily, and let it be A, B, and A is the uppermost part of the rod, and B the lower part. Next unto the root, divide this rod in the middle D, C. I say then, that if the end D be grafted again in the end C, it will grow. Also if B be grafted on A, they will be consolidated together and sprout forth, but if D be grafted upon A or C upon B, they will be at strife, and consequently will never grow, but one of them must needs die, by reason of the preposterous order and inconvenient position, because that the vegetative force or vigor, which proceedeth after one manner, is now diverted, and compelled or forced into contrary parts. I will say no more touching this point, but proceed unto the main burthen of these practical magnetical conclusions with their infallible demonstration. Chapter 6. How the feasibility and possibility of the magnetical manner of cure by the weapon salve is produced and demonstrated to be natural. The which that we may the better effect, we will first set down our main proposition touching this kind of cure, and afterward elucidate and clearly demonstrate it by evident proofs, derived especially from the virtue of the lodestone. The proposition, if after the wound is made, a portion of the wound's external blood, with his inward spirits, or of his internal spirits only, that have penetrated into the weapon, or any other thing which hath searched the depth of the wound, be conveyed from the wound at any reasonable but unlimited or unknown distance, unto an ointment, whose composition is balsamic, and agreeing specifically with the nature of the creature so wounded, and be in a decent and convenient manner adapted, and as it were, transplanted or grafted into it, the ointment so animated by those spirits will become forthwith magnetical, and apply with a magnetical aspect or regard unto the beamy spirits which stream forth invisibly from the wound, being directed thereunto by those spiritual bloody spirits in the weapon, or other thing, which hath received or included them. And the lively and southern beams streaming and flowing from the wound, will with the northern attraction of the ointment, so magnetically animated, concur and unite themselves with the northern and congealed, or fixed bloody spirits contained in the ointment, and stir them to act southernly, that is from the center to the circumference, so that by this reciprocal action, union, or continuity, the lively southern beams will act and revive the chill fixed or northern beams, which do animate the ointment with a magnetical virtue, and quicken spirits of the ointment, animated by the spirits of them both, and directed by the spirits which were first transplanted into it, doth impart by the said union, or continuity, his balsamic and sanative virtue, unto the spirits in the wound, being first magnetically attracted, and they afterwards by an inseparable harmony, transfer it back again unto the wound. And this is the reason of that sympathetical and antipathetical reference or respect, which is by experience observed to be between the ointment and the wound, so that if the whole space of the weapon that made the wound be covered and anointed with the unguent, and the unguent be well wrapped and kept warm, the wound will find consolation, and be at ease. But if a part of the ointment be pared away, or wiped off from the weapon, it hath been often tried, that pain or dolour will immediately ensue and afflict the wound. Moreover, if the place anointed be kept temperately warm, the wound will also rest in temper, but if it be uncovered and left in the open cold air, then will it happen, that the wound will also be distempered and vexed with cold. Chapter 7. Certain problematical demonstrations, to prove the foresaid proposition to be true in every point, and consequently to manifest this manner of magical cure to be effected naturally, and therefore not cacomagically. The particulars of the foresaid proposition are easily proved and maintained by such ocular demonstrations, as may be produced from the virtuous operation of the mineral lodestone, unto the which we may rightly compare all magnetical bodies with their actions, because they have their denominations from the mineral magnet, and therefore this weapon salve is termed by some men unguentum magneticum, and the cure is also called magnetical. I proceed therefore in my purpose after this fashion, to prove the proposition punctually, and therefore I divide it into members or portions. The first member of those propositions, with certain experimental conclusions from the lodestone to confirm it. First therefore we gather by the said precedent proposition, that two magnetical bodies of a like nature may spiritually meet and conjoin together by a like natural inclination, and that the weapon wounding or other material penetrating doth imbibe the spirits and is made magnetical. One problematical demonstration, taken from the lodestone. Take two lodestones, and place them in small wooden vessels or boats of cork or wood, and set them upon a basin or tub or cistern of water, so that each of the magnets may aspect one another, within the visible orb of his virtue, and you shall perceive them sensibly to move, and as it were to incite each other to mutual embracement, so that at the contrary poles unto one another they will meet and unite themselves, which is an argument that dissevered spirits, of an identity of nature, do sympathetically operate and act one upon the other, at a distance. 2. Demonstration from the same. In the like manner, if we shall place a piece of iron in one little boat, and a lodestone in another, you will find that the iron will hasten with the like celerity unto the lodestone, being also in his small bark, for you shall perceive that each of them will be carried unto the other, and will the one stick and adhere unto the other in the midway, and after that the desire of each of them is accomplished, that is, after coition and union, they will stand still and rest in their consents. 3. Demonstration. 1 problem. One vein of iron being rightly disposed, will draw unto it another if the vein be rich, and of the color of iron. As for example, put one piece of the vein in his little cup, or small boat or bark, as is said before of the lodestone, and hold in your hand another piece of the same mine, somewhat near the other, and you shall find the other in his bark to move unto it, but nothing so swiftly as will the iron unto the lodestone. 2 problem. You shall find it also for a most true experiment, that if iron be taken nakedly of itself, that is, not being excited by the lodestone, or anything else, it will draw another iron unto it, though not so swiftly as the lodestone, that is vigorous. A trial is made thus. Make a piece of cork round, and as big as a hazel nut, and pierce it through the center with a reasonable big piece of wire, till the middle of the iron be in the center of the cork. Put it into a quiet water to swim in, and apply it unto its other end very near, but so that it toucheth it not, the end of another piece of wire. And you shall see that the piece you hold in your hand shall draw the other in the cork, so that as you move the one, the other shall slowly follow. And this must be effected by the application of such of their ends as shall agree in their pull. The demonstration is this. Application. By these examples therefore it is made evident, how the two spirits of like disposition, or rather of one identity of nature, are apt and prone by a natural inclination to covet and embrace their like, and that at a distance or space between each body, and consequently that it is not the bodies that acteth, for they are divided and distant from one another, but the formal spirits which by an astral emanation do sympathetically and lovingly first aspect one another, and then by an equal attraction do as it were, kiss and hug together. And therefore it cannot seem strange or impossible unto wise men, that the bloody spirits in the ointment and those in the wounded person should at a far distance meet and apply together, by a sympathetical aspect, being that they are but one continued and indivisible quintessential spirit, though altered in elementary property, even as the northern air is by the north wind made to differ from the south, though all is but one essential and indivisible air. Touching the last branch of this member it argueth, that spirits may be, nay are imbibed by the weapon that wanteth, which by this axiom of Paracelsus, maketh the place of the weapon which wanteth a magnet, or Macrocosmicall. The problem is this. 3. Problem. Every body, after that it hath imbibed the mummy which issueth from man, is forthwith made a magnet unto him, and this is proved magnetically by this problem. 4. Problem. Iron incited or touched by the lodestone at the pole, doth draw unto him the like of the lodestone that toucheth it. Application. Now that the vital spirits of the wounded animal do penetrate in the very moment of the stroke into the weapon, and that the weapon doth greedily suck them in, it is proved by this following observation. Some country chirurgeons, not daring to search some deep wounds with a probe, do use to take the weapon that made the wound, be it sword, dagger, knife, and such like, and put it into the fire, and though before you saw no difference in the color of the weapon, yet after it cometh out of the fire, you shall see the place of it that wounded, altered in color from the other, by reason of such spirits as it did imbibe. This is commonly found true by experience. Another proof to maintain this is that if a viper or adder be cut with a sword or knife in pieces, the venomous, odious, and irascible spirit of the serpent will penetrate into the substance of the steel, which is confirmed by this, namely because that if a man be afterward wounded by this weapon, that did cut and divide the adder or viper, it will so envenom the wound, that it will be made incurable, except an antidote made of adder or viper be applied. So also the scorpion, being bruised and applied unto the wound, that is made by the scorpion, will cure it, as also an oil made of the same. The second member of the proposition, with the proofs. Secondly, that if a magnetical body, be it animal, vegetable, or mineral, be divided into parts, the spiritual nature of these parts do always tend unto unity, although these parts be divided far from one another, which is an argument that they are no continued thing in spirits, and therefore one part doth directly cooperate and send out actual beams of sympathetical identity unto another, though the bodily divided parts be absent or distant in space from one another. A demonstration to confirm this. This is sufficiently proved by the ocular demonstrations recited for the confirmation of the first member, but more especially by the second demonstration of the 8th chapter of this present book, where I have shewed you that if a long lodestone be divided in the middle, between the two poles, that is to say about the equinoctial line, and each of these divided parts be put to float in his small vessel or bark on the still water, The influential spirit, which is one in essence, and continued between them, doth desire and covet to unite the divided mineral bodies, whose limbs are by a wound or solution of continuity separated, and to reduce them into the natural estate they were in at the first, and for that cause B and C, whereof the one is meridional, namely B, and the other septentrional, to wit, C, which were at the first continuated parts but now divided, are by that unseparable spirit, which giveth life unto both the parts, reunited, sucked and drawn together, and reduced unto the estate of their pristine continuity, that is, of two stones they are made one, so that the portion of spirit in C draweth and attracteth the bodily B unto it, and the proportion of spirit in B sucketh and enticeth C unto it, for we must note that the unity of spirit doth evermore desire and affect the unity of the body, in which it dwelleth. For the quintessential or formal spirit delighteth not in the variable disposition of the airy spirit, and therefore coveteth to inhabit the close specifical house or palace, which it did possess immediately after his descent from his celestial starry parents. This is the reason that one specific spirit is most easy, yea, and rejoiceth to communicate with his like, but especially one and the same spirit must needs act with, and never be absent from the other, and therefore when the frozen northern and as it were congealed nature is incited and stirred up by the equinoctial or southern property, if it be rightly adopted, and the southern iron's property is touched with the magnetical north pole of the other, they will effect attraction the better, and to this purpose speaketh this problem. Long lodestone be divided in the middle, between the two poles, that is to say, about the equinoctial line, and each of these divided parts be put to float in his small vessel or bark on the still water. The influential spirit, which is one in essence, and continued between them, doth desire and covet to unite the divided mineral bodies, whose limbs are by a wound or solution of continuity separated, and to reduce them into the natural estate they were in at the first, and for that cause B and C, whereof the one is meridional, namely B, and the other septentrional, to wit, C, which were at the first continuated parts but now divided, are by that unseparable spirit, which giveth life unto both the parts, reunited, sucked and drawn together, and reduced unto the estate of their pristine continuity, that is, of two stones they are made one, so that the portion of spirit in C draweth and attracteth the bodily B unto it, and the proportion of spirit in B sucketh and enticeth C unto it, for we must note that the unity of spirit doth evermore desire and affect the unity of the body in which it dwelleth. For the quintessential or formal spirit delighteth not in the variable disposition of the airy spirit, and therefore coveteth to inhabit the close specifical house or palace, which it did possess immediately after his descent from his celestial starry parents. This is the reason that one specific spirit is most easy, yea, and rejoiceth to communicate with his like, but especially one and the same spirit must needs act with, and never be absent from the other, and therefore when the frozen northern and as it were congealed nature is incited and stirred up by the equinoctial or southern property, if it be rightly adopted, and the southern iron's property is touched with the magnetical north pole of the other, they will effect attraction the better, and to this purpose speaketh this problem. Problem. If magnetical bodies be divided, or any part broken off from the whole, each part so broken off will have his north and south, and therefore each particle of iron, or of the lodestone being divided from the whole, will have a northern property, and a southern, which doth manifestly confirm unto wise men's capacities, that the spirit of every specific, yea, of every individual, hath a northern and a southern condition, and consequently an attractive and dilative property. And not only the spirit of the whole, but also of every particular of it, being that the formal spirit is in all and in every part. Application. Ye may therefore perceive by this, how possible and feasible it is, that the spirit in the dead blood or weapon, being transferred, and as it were transplanted at a far distance in the ointment, as having a balsam nor differing from the animal nature, but especially in respect of the vegetable salt of the ulmias, in the which altogether lurk spirits, which by the present application of the southern, lively, and warm spirits in the wounded man, guided unto it by the spirit's transported or transplanted blood, doth revivify and cooperate with the same spirit, not only in the staunching of the flowing blood, but also in the healing and consolidating of the wound, as shall be shewed you more amply hereafter. Usnea stauncheth blood. The third member of the proposition is confirmed by these proofs. Thirdly, that it is not the animal's external blood, but the internal in the external, which being separated from his fountain and transplanted on another unctuous stock, doth operate magnetically from the stock on which it is planted, unto the fountain or spring from whence it floweth. And it is maintained thus, a demonstration to confirm this first problem. It is not any corporeal thing which floweth from the lodestone, or which penetrateth into iron, or that is poured or extracted out of the iron, being awaked by the lodestone's power, but one lodestone disposeth another, by an original or primary form. And the lodestone doth revoke, and disposeth the iron which is familiar unto his nature, together with itself, unto a formed vigor, for which reason the iron runs unto the lodestone, and doth greedily conform itself unto it. Application. Therefore it is a formal spirit, or subtle celestial influence, which doth operate mutually from the wounded body, unto the transported or transplanted blood, and not the body, or the blood, or the air, or the ointment in which the transported blood, or bloody spirits are contained, so that the excited spirits in the ointment do apply their regard unto the beams of the exciter, the north spiracle unto the southern, and so a union is made between the spirits of the ointment with the adopted blood, and those of the wounded body. And as we see, that by the concourse in the macrocosmical air of the north wind and the south, both spirits are united into one form, and are magnetically, with their airy vehicle, contracted into a cloud, which containeth in it a formal fire or lightning, and a watery body, so the two emanations do cause a contracted airy spirit in the place of their concourse or application, which doth in his contraction attract the balsamic spirit which the ointment doth send forth, even as we see in the weather glass, that the contracted air sucketh up with it the mass of the water, and yet the air so contracted is not for all that visible. But this is further confirmed by this problem. 2. Problem. Iron is allured and drawn, only by the immaterial act of form, that is to say by an incorporeal proceeding, the which doth act and is conceived in the iron subject, as in a continuate homogeneal body, and this is the reason, that iron is moved and drawn unto the lodestone, without being impeded or hindered, by the interposition of dense and well-compacted bodies between them. And again, iron draweth not to the lodestone itself, and the concourse unto unity is moved by a mutual consent and vigor, the which concourse is vulgarly termed attraction. Application. Therefore it is a formal spirit, or subtle celestial influence, which doth operate mutually from the wounded body unto the transported or transplanted blood, and not the body, or the blood, or the air, or the ointment, in which the transported blood or bloody spirits are contained, so that the excited spirits in the ointment do apply their regard unto the beams of the exciter, the north spiracle unto the southern, and so a union is made between the spirits of the ointment with the adopted blood, and those of the wounded body. And as we see, that by the concourse in the macrocosmical air of the north wind and the south, both spirits are united into one form, and are magnetically, with their airy vehicle, contracted into a cloud, which containeth in it a formal fire or lightning, and a watery body, so the two emanations do cause a contracted airy spirit in the place of their concourse or application, which doth in his contraction attract the balsamic spirit which the ointment doth send forth, even as we see in the weather glass, that the contracted air sucketh up with it the mass of the water, and yet the air so contracted is not for all that visible. But this is further confirmed by this problem. 2. Problem. Iron is allured and drawn, only by the immaterial act of form, that is to say by an incorporeal proceeding, the which doth act and is conceived in the iron subject, as in a continuate homogeneal body, and this is the reason, that iron is moved and drawn unto the lodestone, without being impeded or hindered, by the interposition of dense and well-compacted bodies between them. And again, iron draweth not to the lodestone itself, and the concourse unto unity is moved by a mutual consent and vigor, the which concourse is vulgarly termed attraction. Application. Here we see that reference which is between the magnet and the mine, out of which that spirit which doth animate the magnet is drawn. As for example, in the forementioned chapter, the spirit of the microcosmical mummy is in the excrementitious excrescence transported unto the plant. And so the plant, animated by that spirit, becometh a magnet, which directeth his vegetating spirit to apply unto the spirit or beam of the weak member, etc. I come now to the proof of the fourth member. The fourth member of the proposition is demonstratively proved thus. Fourthly, that there is a spiritual penetration made from one body unto another, before any magnetical operation can be effected. Demonstration. This member is sufficiently confirmed by that which is already said in the other members, and yet it is more plainly expressed by this problem. Problem. The lodestone doth guide and direct magnetical things, the which do conceive vigor and force from it, not only in their extremities, but also in their interiors and very marrow. As for example, a piece of iron, so soon as it is touched or attainted with the very breath of the lodestone, it is excited magnetically at the end at which it is touched or regarded, and that very power which it received by that touch, passeth quite through from the end touched unto the other, not only superficially, but also centrally, and at the very marrow. Application. It appeareth evidently by this that as the formal beams of one lodestone doth penetrate unto the very center of the other, and the other again reciprocally into the very center of it, so also the spirit of the wounded man doth penetrate, partly by emission from itself, and partly by attraction of his like in the ointment, into the bowels of the ointment, unto the spirits of his own kind that are hid in it, and reciprocally the ointment being made a magnet by the imbibing of the mummial spirits of the blood, applieth his attractive beams unto those which are emitted from the wound, being directed therein by the spirit of the dead blood in the unguent, as shall be shewed hereafter more at large. The fifth member of the proposition, with the proofs. Fifthly, that the magnetical act and operation of celestial, astralical or starry and influential spirits are not to be limited, nor yet to be impeded or hindered in their motion, if we look into the mystery of this business with intellectual eyes. We must distinguish this member, for your better understanding, into two several articles or branches, whereof the first must shew that the extension of the emanations made from two astrolocal or starry spirits are not to be limited by man's understanding, howsoever by an external effect it may at random be guessed at. The second shall prove that such influential starry beams, or quintessential emissions, as are sent forth from the lodestone unto the iron, or from one lodestone unto his like in nature, and consequently from all other magnetical bodies, of like condition in essence, cannot be hindered by the interposition of any solid or well-compacted bodies, as some philosophers, rather than philosophers, have temerariously averred in their writings. Touching the first, which includeth the imaginary termination or bounding of beamy or formal extensions, or emanations from magnetical bodies within a settled, or known limited sphere of activity, the impossibility thereof is argued by these following problematical demonstrations. Certain problematical demonstrations confirming the contents of this member's first article. 1. Problem. The vigor in heavenly bodies whereby they move themselves doth argue a soul in them, and for that reason they are esteemed by the wisest philosophers to be endued and animated with a divine act or spirit, by means whereof they move, which being so, the extension of application of their beams must also prove uncertain, and therefore without limit, being that their spirits, after the emanation made, do concur sometimes in the air, sometimes in the water, and sometimes without resistance, they pierce even unto the center of the earth to operate upon the mineral kingdom, bestowing on the earthly subjects that are under them, of that very formal act and virtue, whereby they operate in their acute penetration, and therefore these inferior creatures of a like nature are able to send forth and extend their astrolocal or beamy virtues as far, and to apply their beams at as an unterminable distance, as their stars in heaven are observed to do. 2. Problem. It is rightly then said, that the lodestone doth move the lodestone, and doth both dispose of one another by their primary form, which it receiveth from his starry fountain. And therefore it was not any absurdity in the wise man, Thales Milesius, nor yet any madness in Scaliger, to assign a soul unto the magnet, seeing that by it it is centrally incited, directed, and carried or moved circularly, as for example. If two magnets be put one against the other in their small barks upon the water, they will not presently concur together, but first they do mutually conform themselves unto one another. Or else the lesser doth obey the greater, moving itself after a circular fashion, and when at the last they are disposed according unto their natural position, they run or concur together. The like effect also will appear between the magnet and the iron, and the iron, as shall be expressed hereafter. An addition, whereby although it may be replied that this act of the lodestone with the lodestone, or it with the iron, doth by effect seem to be limited, within a certain dimension, and therefore what I say proveth not much as yet, for the unbounded dimension of the magnetical body's emanation. I answer, that the sensible act which is between the lodestone and lodestone doth not argue, that because the two ponderous bodies have their motion but at such a distance therefore their spirits can extend themselves, or apply their beams no further, for it is one thing to operate sensibly, by a violent attraction of a heavy mass, and another thing for one form only, to embrace and concur in a natural rejoicing sympathy with another. And this alteration is verified even of such as are well practiced in the lodestone's property, by this following problem. 3. Problem. The orbi of the internal or spiritual magnetical virtue doth extend itself at a larger distance than the orbi of any sensible, or external, or visible motion can warrant, for the thing that is magnetical is affected in the extremity of it, afar off, although it doth not move by a local motion. But if the lodestone be applied nearer unto it, then will also the whole magnetic mass move corporally unto it. Whereby is acknowledged that the virtuous extension of the magnet is far beyond the limits of the orbi of visible magnetical motion, but I will prove it by degrees more evidently, namely that the starry influential virtue in the magnet extendeth itself beyond the limits of any sensible capacity. 4. Problem. The needle touched magnetically will aspect the North Pole, even from the equinoctial point, which is an argument of the unlimited extension of the lodestone's virtue. As for example, let there be a long lodestone prepared, and directly in the middle upon the equinoctial B, where the axis runneth, plant an incited needle, and it will look directly unto the North Pole A. Also if within the orbi you place another incited needle without the stone in C, it will also look directly upon the said pole, whereby we may discern the long distance which is between the aspect of the magnet and that of the incited body, namely 90 degrees. Again, each part or fragment that is divided from the magnet hath therefore the self-same dimension, because it is as well endued with his polar virtues as the whole. And this is sufficiently testified by this problem. 5. Problem. If magnetical subjects be divided, or any piece be broken off from it by any means, every part so broken off from the whole will have an end as well septentrional as meridional, as well as the whole had. As for example, if a smaller part or piece be taken out of a greater lodestone, it will be endued with the same life and vigor, which the whole magnet had, no otherwise than the child will, touching his life wholly correspond with the Father in life and parts, and it will be as it were a new creature, and will have his poles and equinoctial as well as the whole stone had. Also if an iron rod, as is that of the curtain, be hung up, and have his position north and south without being touched, it will induce those properties, namely the polar virtues, and move in the air being hung up by a thread, or put into a boat on the water unto the north and south. If a small piece of the rod be broke off from the north part, it will have his north and south pole, as well as the whole rod of iron from the which it was broken. Whereby it is apparent, that if every portion or fragment of the lodestone or iron have his pole as well as the whole, then the spirit which is within hath his relation or application with the northern pole star of the great world, and doth also behold the southern virtue, with his south pole. For except there were the scintille of the anima mundi, which is in it and operateth in it, according unto the small proportion of it, no otherwise than it doth in the great world, it could not aspect each pole, as it is observed by experience to do, and consequently as the actions of the anima mundi are so catholic, that they cannot be limited, so are the spiritual, quintessential, or astralical emanations. I prove it further thus. 6. Problem. If you take an iron rod made of good iron and hang it up in the air on a thread as if it were touched with a lodestone, etc. The experience is this: take a straight piece of iron or steel of 6 foot long, and a finger thick, hang it up in a close chamber, into the which there cometh no wind, and you shall discern it slowly to move, and by little and little to attain with his extremities or ends of the points of north and south, no otherwise than the needle doth in the dials which are touched with the lodestone. Moreover, we shall find that the lodestone, or anything else that is touched or excited by the lodestone, will direct their aspect, being planted in small boats, on the needle on his vertical unto the north pole. The conclusion. Wherefore it is made manifest, that the extension of the lodestone's spiritual or formal emanation, as also that of other magnetical bodies, is not to be limited, being that they do act and apply their beams unto the very state of the pole star, and the pole star by his like emitted influences, doth operate reciprocally and apply unto or aspect the lodestone, and so make a continuated spiritual union betwixt them, being that we ocularly discern, that both it and the iron doth diligently, and with a manifest sympathy aspect, and actually move unto the said star. And then, after this is well considered, let us but think and ponder the distance, which is between the pole star and the magnet, namely betwixt the 8th sphere and the earth, and he will perceive it to be in a manner infinite and incommensurable, and consequently the emitted beams of the lodestone cannot by any fantastical sphere, of sensible and sensual philosophers, be comprehended or limited. But if the act of the pole star on the magnet be denied, and Fracastorius' opinion, with that of many other learned men, be received, namely that the lodestone, the iron, and the needle touched, do tend unto the north pole, by reason of the attraction of certain rocks of lodestone, which are in the hyperboreal mountains. If this opinion were admitted to be true, yet may we see by it, that the act of the magnet and the actual respect which the magnetical body beareth unto it, is not to be limited, being that so they will be observed to cooperate from the equinoctial unto the northern hyperborean rocks. But this opinion hath been proved false by us in another place, and shall hereafter be demonstrated by us to be so. We will now come to our application, touching this first article. Application. The first and second problem teacheth us, that there is such a celestial or astralical subtle spirit, in all magnetical bodies of the earth, as is in the heavenly ones, and consequently, that the beams of each of them may penetrate as far, though they be not discerned by sense, as the beams of each star. By this therefore we may be assured, that man's heavenly spirit being of a more pure and subtle stuff, than is that of the lodestone, may send forth the astralical beams of his virtue, not only to the mark that the lodestone aimeth at, but also unto the highest throne of divinity. Again, hereby it is argued, that the spirit in the transplanted blood is able to operate at any distance on the wound, and the beamy spirit of the wound again, to cooperate, and have a continuated union and respect unto one another. The third instructeth us, that though the ointment and blood in it do not appear mobile or movable at a far distance, yet they may cooperate and be conjoined with the spirit of the wounded, at an unknown proportion of space. By the fourth and fifth we learn, that the extension of the northern blood's aspect unto the southern, may be so far, as the equinoctial is from the pole, namely, 90 degrees. But I say, that as the northern and southern emanation of the soul of the world, filleth all the cavity of the world, so also by it, and in it, may this act of that soul in man extend itself, far beyond the capacity of flesh and blood, and therefore is only intellectually to be understood. By the fifth, that each particle of man's blood, or spiritual mummy, being divided from the whole, hath all the parts or proportions in it ideally described, that the whole hath, and therefore doth so operate as well with a northern, as southern aspect, and consequently draweth down from the heavens a like property, as occasion is given. For so this one spirit is said to come from the four winds, and yet it is but one spirit in essence, though fourfold in property, for it was by the virtue of it that the dead, mentioned by the prophet, did rise again. And therefore, so far as the north wind or south wind's extension may be, so far is this spirit in man able to send forth his spiritual beam. I will come now unto the proof of the second. Touching the second article, which sheweth the acute penetration of this spirit, and that it is effected without any impediment, contrary unto some ignorant person's opinion, who think that castles, stones, woods, hills, and such like, may hinder the penetration of this subtle and all-penetrating spirit, the proof is made by these problematical demonstrations. Demonstrations confirming this member's second article. 1. Problem. Neither fire nor water nor earth can hinder the ingressive action, or piercing virtue of the lodestone upon the iron, being it is proved by experience, that it sucketh and draweth it unto him quite through them, as for example, if a candle or flame of fire be interposed between the lodestone and a small piece of wire, you shall find the piece of iron will leap quite through the flame unto the lodestone. In like manner, the needle on his turn-pin will, for all the interposition of a flame, turn unto the lodestone, and that with the same celerity that it would do in the open air. So that you may see by this experiment, that the coition of these Macrocosmicall bodies are not hindered by fire. Also if water or earth be interposed between them, it will do the like. There is another problem, which expresseth the irresistible penetrative virtue of this, more effectually in these terms. 2. Problem. Iron is allured only by an immaterial act, or an incorporeal process which doth operate, and is conceived in an iron subject, as in a continuated homogeneal body, and therefore it hath no need of large or wide passages, and for this reason, the iron is moved and drawn by the lodestone itself, and again, the iron doth draw. So that you see, that the putting or applying of thick substances between the iron and the lodestone, cannot hinder the coition of spirits, which is a token, that the influential or formal spirit cannot be impeded in his motion. And therefore this subtle spirit, which hath his beginning from the soul of the world, is said by the wisest philosopher, omnia permir entia, to pass or traverse all things. But yet more plainly. 3. Problem. The lodestone without any frication or rubbing or being exsicated by heat or, perfused with moisture, in the air and in the water, doth provoke and allure unto it Macrocosmicall subjects, and also solid as well compacted bodies, as thick boards or tables of stone, or gross plates of metal, as silver, gold or brass being put between. And Ridley saith, that although such substances as be not Macrocosmicall be placed between the needle and the lodestone, yet they cannot hinder the orbe and proceeding of the magnetic vigor. As for example, if a lodestone should be placed in a box of wood, stone, tin, silver, or brass, yet the lodestone will extend his Macrocosmicall orbe. Application. I conclude therefore by this typical expression, that the emissions of man's vital spirits are so subtle and so piercing that no interposed bodies are able to hinder it in its motion to his pretended mark, nor yet the Macrocosmicall blood in the ointment being excited, can be hindered in his concourse or union, with the same southern or vivifying spirit, and that especially, because the formal spirits of the one is continued and homogeneous unto the other. I proceed now unto the sixth member of the foresaid proposition, the sixth member of the proposition with the proofs. Sixthly, that after a body is made, by a transplantation of another body's spirits, Macrocosmicall, or a magnet, unto that other body, it doth, by attracting of its beloved spirits unto it, impart unto them of that virtue and property, which appertaineth unto itself, insomuch that, as the lover doth participate with the nature of the beloved, so also the beloved doth partake and share with the lover's condition, especially if they be homogeneous in kind, and reciprocally in affection. Certain problematical demonstrations to confirm this member of the foresaid proposition. 1. Problem.
Quod libet corpus cui mumia viva, in alio homin propinatur, illico fit magnis.
Every body, to whom the lively mummy from a man is given or administered, is forthwith made a magnet. Application. This problem is animal, and not mineral, but it inferreth, that by the transplanting of man's bloody spirits into the ointment is forthwith become Macrocosmicall and attractive, even as before I told you, that the hair and nails being planted or grafted on the oak, make it forthwith, by communicating of the spirits of the one with the spirits of the other, attractive and magnetic. 2. Problema magneticum. The lodestone hath nothing, neither can do anything, which the iron being excited cannot do, and that not only by contact but at a reasonable distance. Application. Neither can the live man's spirit perform any action, that the dead blood transplanted in the salve, by the Macrocosmicall assistance of the salve cannot perform. Yea, verily it goeth yet further, for it inspireth into the wound a sanative influence. 3. Problem. Iron being touched, doth recreate another iron, and instructeth it unto Macrocosmicall motions, so that it draweth unto it a third. As for example, the lodestone being applied unto A, it draweth unto it the piece of wire B, and also after B, it draweth C, and after C it draweth D. Application. The iron B is compared unto the spirits that are first animated by the lively spirits in man, and that animates the ointment spirits, which are of a Macrocosmicall nature, by reason of usnea volatile salt, which is the receptacle of such vegetating and vivifying spirits as give life unto man, save only they are of a northern property, and as it were dead. These spirits in ointment are referred unto C, which work and operate, being so excited in D, which importeth the emitted spirits of the wounded man, so that we see that it is but one and the same continuated spirit, which putteth into action the three several subjects, and their spirits, namely the blood transported, the ointment and the body of the wounded. 4. Problem. The lodestone and the vein of iron are all one, and have all one matrix, and are found in one mine as twins, yea, and the robust magnet hath iron in it. And therefore the iron which is extracted from them both, hath all the magnetical virtues as well in the vein, as being made by separation but more weakly, except it be excited by the lodestone, and added unto it by capping, for so it will be stronger in his magnetical power than the lodestone itself. Gilbertus de Magnet, Liber 1, Caput 4. Application. In like manner the blood in the wounded person, and that which is transplanted to be purified, and comforted in the ointment, came out of one and the same vein, and have all one matrix, and therefore that extracted blood hath in it all the magnetical virtues, but more weakly, and more in puissance than in act, except it be excited by the southern fountain of blood, and capped with the balsamic nature of the unguent. For being so prepared, namely incited and addressed, it will have his own northern power, and that balsamic and attractive virtue of the usnea is so powerful in his northern saturnine condition, that it suddenly sealeth up and arresteth by congelation the southern blood that floweth, even as the northern wind converteth the air into fix, and immobile snow or hail. 5. Problem. The lodestone and the iron, among all other bodies that are known unto us, are more near in nature and condition unto the earth, for they have in them a substance that is most genuine and homogenical, and approaching unto the earth. And therefore these three do agree in nature together. Application. By this it appeareth what near reference there is between the body of man which we compare rightly unto the earth, and the blood which issueth out of the veins of the earth referred to the lodestone, and the ointment endued with a bloody spirit, and which was extracted out of blood, for the fat and the usnea. And mummy were on blood, for scriptures tell us that the soul of the flesh, and consequently of the fat and bones, is in the blood. Whereby we may see, that though these three do differ in bodily substance, yet they agree in the homogeneity of spirit, and therefore it is no marvel, though there is a continuity between the spirit of the bodily blood, and that transplanted. Neither also ought we much to wonder at the natural commerce, which is between the bloody spirits and the ointment, that so sudden a union should be made between them, and that it should forthwith become a magnet, adopted onely in his balsamic and sanative operation, for the wound, being that is guided and directed by these bloody spirits, which are transplanted in it, and, after animation, did convert the beams of his nature unto his like, being as near in spirit and property unto the wounded man's blood, as is a piece of iron, or lodestone, which is broken from off the whole, which accordeth in every respect with the spirit of his father from whence it sprung. So also we see, that though the macrocosmical air doth seem to vary in nature, according to his position, yet it is but one spirit, howsoever it is divided into this or that cloud. And again the internal or formal spirit which animateth diversely the four winds, is but one and the same indivisible spirit. In like manner, it is but one and the same identity of spirit, which acteth in the wound. The conveyed blood and the ointment being all three, as it were but one blood, as the apostle taught the Athenians, that all men came of one blood, and consequently of one spirit in the blood. 6. Problem. Attraction is made in the primary bodies, and these are nearest unto one another, and of a mutual consent among themselves by reason of their identity, in condition. And for this reason the lodestone draweth the lodestone, and iron draweth iron, and earth of them all draweth earth, and again, each of them draweth another. Application. Hence therefore is gathered a reason, why blood draweth blood, and one body his like, and the ointment being animated by one and the same nature, doth attract his like unto him.
And therefore Paracelsus saith justly, quod libet corpus, qui mumia viva, in alio homine propinatur. Illico fit magnas, every body that drinketh or taketh inwardly the lively mummy of another man, is forthwith made a magnet.
And therefore we may say justly, seeing experience hath made it manifest, that every microcosmical ointment, that hath imbibed or comprehended the spiritual mummy of another man's blood, is forthwith made a magnet, and by the incitation of the mummial spirit which it containeth, doth greedily thirst and covet after his like. And for that reason draweth, and allureth it unto it, thereby to impart as well unto it, as it doth communicate his vivifying property unto his attractor. I could say much more, to prove the reason of the strong attraction of this ointment, after it is animated with the live man's spirits. But I shall be too tedious, and again I shall touch it in the consequence, and for that reason I will leave this member to proceed to the seventh. The seventh member of the proposition with the proofs. Seventhly, that the agent which causeth the alien or strange body, much more that which is of his consanguinity, to become magnetic, and affectionate, or concupiscible, and that by a kind of proximity in nature, is the bloody spirit transplanted. certain problematical demonstrations to confirm the member of the foresaid proposition. This member, for the better explication of our purpose, we must divide into 3 articles or particles, whereof the first shall prove that the transplanted spirit maketh the unguent, into the which it is committed, a magnet unto the wounded person. The second, that it is the onely guider and director of the unguent's force, and conductor of his balsamic faculty unto the wounded spirit. And the last shall demonstrate how a weak and impotent spirit operateth but weakly of itself, and yet by the assistance of a sounder and stronger nature, it is refreshed, and becometh strong again. Demonstrations confirming the contents of this member's first article. Touching the first article of this member, which maketh the transplanted spirit the cause that the unguent is magnetical, we prove it thus. First problem. Experience hath taught us, and Baptista Porta confirmeth so much, that if a weak lodestone be hid in the dust of steel for a season, it will become more strong and powerful in his attraction. Also the steel will be bettered by his nature. But Paracelsus cometh more near in his relation, and saith, that by heating of the lodestone, and extinguishing of him in an oil of crocus martis, which is made of the best Corinthian steel so often, till it will imbibe no more, it will so corroborate this lodestone, that it will have 10 times more force than it had in attraction. Application. By a like relation, the weak spirits in the transplanted blood being imbibed by the animal unguent, which hath the self-same relation unto the spiritual mummy in it, as the oil of crocus martis hath unto the weak spirits in the lodestone, will be revived and recreated in his magnetic vigor, and being mingled with his unctuous like, will make a compounded magnet, which will draw his like spirits more strongly by far than it could before. Again, as the small or weak magnet doth recover force, by being buried in the dust or ferruginous earth, which is of his nature, so also the bloody spirits being interred in the unctuous earth of his own nature, doth by the attraction of his like from the fountain of blood, and of the salutary spirit from the ointment, so unite itself unto the ointment, that it createth by emanation a fit magnet, which communicateth his balsamic nature unto them both, and by attraction of the spirit of the wounded member, it rendereth itself medicinable, so that by a continuity and integrity of spirit it conferreth, through an immediate spiritual contact, the balsamic spirit of the usnea and other unctuous ingredients, into the wound. Do we not observe, that the water which passeth or runneth by a heap of salt, doth endue wholly the virtue of the salt, though the stream of it be long, and doth communicate that nature from one extreme unto the other, and much more the air will carry the nature of the place it passeth by afar off, and yet all that air so animated will be continuate, and therefore much more that subtle celestial spirit which doth inhabit the air. Second problem. Iron being touched, doth recreate other iron by touching it, and instructeth it unto magnetical motions. Application. By the like proportion in the animal kingdom, the transplanted spirit being first animated by his southern or living fountain, doth animate and recreate magnetically the unguent, so that it doth operate upon the wounded man's spirit, being emanated and attracted unto it by bettering of his wounded nature, through his balsamic emission. Third problem. Set a lodestone of no force or strength that can be perceived, upon a lodestone of good strength and vigor, especially upon the poles, and he will shew a vigor, as if he were as strong as the other lodestone, whereunto he was united, but after he is taken away, he will be as weak as he was before, unless it be done again often. The selfsame effect followeth, if a piece of iron be placed on a strong lodestone, but take it away from the stone, and almost all the virtue will be lost. Application. In the like manner, the weak northern blood being transplanted into the ointment, and applying itself unto the lively spirit's emanation, by the preservation and corroboration of the ointment, waxeth strong, and draweth or operateth effectually, rendering the whole ointment magnetical. But if it happen, that the ointment be either pared off from the place of the weapon, in which the spirits did penetrate, or be struck or wiped off, then it will leave his virtue, which it received from the bloody spirits in the live man, and the balsamic uncture of the unguent, and therefore will the wound by that division be as dolorous or more painful than before. But if the ointment be reapplied unto the place again, and it be wrapped warm, the magnetical concourse will be renewed, and the dolour will forthwith cease, as it hath been tried by many, and this distemper is not made by the cold air only, causing a chill dolour in the wound, but also by the heat of the fire it becometh inflamingly or burningly dolorous. For Mr. James Vrot, sometimes my servant but now apothecary unto the Queen, and dwelling in Blackfriars, did this last year make of the unguent, and for a trial did wound with his lancer a man in the arm, and afterward did anoint the lancer, and applied it to the fire, that the ointment melted, and the lancer waxed hot, and it so fell out that at that instant the wounded person found so great a burning pain in his wound, that he could not endure it, and then immediately he anointed it again, and the wound was forthwith pacified and healed immediately. The apothecary is extant, and will be ready to maintain it. The same is better confirmed by this problem. 4. Problem. If a weak magnet be rubbed at one of his poles with a stronger lodestone, it will be bettered by it by his vigor and virtue, if not augmented in power. Application. the very same proportion of action is between the mummy in the nails and hair and the vegetable magnet, as also between that and the transplanted blood, and in the ointment, for the vegetable magnet or oak did reduce the occult and secret mummy in them, from puissance unto act, by opening the closets of nature, no otherwise than the earth doth the grain of wheat by rotting, and even so also is the potential or northern nature of the spiritual bloody mummy, being extracted and reduced unto action, by the unctuous earth,
or magnetic ointment.
5. Problem. Ridley, chapter 19. If the magnetical needle, being first touched with a lodestone, be made red hot in the fire, it will lose all his polar puissance or virtue, and directive faculty, but if it be freshly touched again, it will recover his virtue and act again. Application. So by converting the proposition for idem est ratio contrariorum, the reason of contraries point at one and the same. If the transplanted blood, which was touched magnetically with the spirit of life, be frozen or congealed with cold, it loseth all his strength, and operative and directive virtue. But if it be comforted by the ointment, and reanimated with the southern or vital spirit, as before, it will not only wax alive and act again, but also render the ointment magnetical, and direct it in his course unto the member affected. 6. Problem. If there be a thin plate of steel fastened unto the nether pole of the magnet or lodestone, namely, between the lodestone and the way of it, then the magnet will lift double, and sometimes decuple, or 10 times so much as it did. From this practice began the capping or arming of the lodestone with steel or iron, after divers manners. Application. So is the translated northern blood rightly compared unto the lodestone, and the ointment to the capping or arming with iron. For by uniting the frozen blood unto the ointment, the attractive power and magnetical force is far the greater, and is able to suck and draw strongly unto it the southern spirit of lively blood in the wounded. I prove this better by this problem following. 7. Problem. If 2 lodestones, armed with 2 teeth apiece, be set before us, the one being strong, the other weak or much less, whose axis or diameter betwixt the teeth is equal, and of like length, then set the teeth of these together, that came from contrary poles and parts, and the stronger will apprehend and lift up the weaker, and the weaker being united, and incorporated with the stronger by the virtue that it receiveth from the stronger, will lift up from the ground, and retain the stronger and greater very firmly, although he be much heavier than the weight which the small stone doth ordinarily lift up. Application. By this mineral type we are taught, that the frozen, evacuated and transported bloody spirits, being capped and armed with the ointment, whose nature is as near as the blood unto the spirits, is made a magnet so puissant that it is able to attract unto itself the bigger and stronger bloody nature, by applying to it the lesser magnet's northern nature, and as it were his northern pole, unto the bigger magnet's southern nature, for by that means in the mineral kingdom, a natural union is made, as is proved by this problem. 8. Problem. There is a natural union, and a violent and depraved union, and the natural is when the coition is made by contrary poles, as by the North Pole and the South. Again, that the strongest attraction is from the North Pole, this problem doth confirm. 9. Problem. The North Pole is the most strong and vigorous pole, to all magnetic intents and purposes, if he have the quantity that the South hath. Application. Whereby it is evident that the northern nature which is in the unctuous magnet and his influential spirit, is by far more attractive than the southern or warm spirit, neither can the southern or equinoctial draw unto it, but as he participates of the northern nature, by a natural concurrency unto his like. And that is the reason, that the natural union is said to be where a concurrency is made of opposite polar natures, for from them is the strongest attraction made, because that it is the nature only of cold to contract, as contrariwise heat doth dilate. This polar force, therefore, is conclusively maintained by this problem, with the which I conclude this article's proof. 10. Problem. The lodestones that be capped, take and apprehend at the pole only. Application. As who should say, that the northern or congealed mummy, capped or armed with the ointment of his own nature, and the southern or lively mummy, capped with flesh, do apply magnetically unto one another at the poles, namely the lively mummy, at the southern or equinoctial, and the weak and frozen at the northern, and therefore the manifest attraction is from the unctuous magnet, and his imbibed agent. 2. Article. Demonstrations confirming the contents of the member's second article or particle, as concerning the second article of this member, which showeth that the spiritual mummy of the transplanted blood, is the director and guider of the ointment's magnetical force, or vigor unto the wound, at what distance soever I demonstrate it, by these problematical assertions following. 1. Problem. The lodestone doth guide and direct magnetical things, which do conceive vigor and force from it, not only in the extremities but also in their interior and veiny marrow. As for example, so soon as a piece of iron is apprehended, it is actired magnetically into the end where it was touched, and that very force so bestowed upon it, penetrateth quite throughout, even unto the other end or extremity, not only superficially but also centrally. Application. By this example it is proved, that the formal mummy of the blood, operateth in the very like manner with the ointment which is to it, as the iron is unto the lodestone, so that as the lodestone by touching the iron, maketh it after the imbibition of his spiritual vigor a magnet, So also after the imbibition of this bloody spiritual mummy, the unguent becometh a magnet, forasmuch as it is truly animated with a magnetical vigor, and doth by virtue of this mummial soul direct his beam and balsamic force unto the fountain, from whence that mummial spirit did arise. I prove the direction to be true, by these other problems following. 2. Problem. One lodestone doth dispose of the other, one doth convert the other, and reduceth it in his order, and guideth and directeth it into his concordances, and when they are met and joined together, they do mutually adhere firmly unto one another. The example is evident, for if you take 2 iron wires of a length, being excited at the ends by contrary poles, and thrust them through round corks as big as hazelnuts, and put them to swim in the water, you shall find that they will by little and little order themselves, and the northern spiritual contact of the one will first direct his axletree, and after draw the south pole unto it, until both meet one another, in the manner of 2 tilters or horsemen with their spears. The demonstration, application. The spiritual mummy in the transplanted blood is one lodestone, which doth dispose the ointment in such a manner, that it becometh a magnet also, and this magnet is directed by the spirit of the mummy into the concordances of the spiritual mummy, which breatheth forth of the living wounded man, which is attracted and uniteth, and partly participateth with his vivifying force, and partly communicateth with him of his balsamical spirit, which by reason of his continuity with the wound, it doth easily, though invisibly transfer unto the wound. 3. Article. Demonstrations confirming the contents of this member's third and last article or particle. As for the third and last article of this member which sheweth, that a weak and impotent spirit operateth but weakly of itself, but by the assistance of a stronger nature it is recreated, and becometh vigorous. And lastly again, it is also confirmed by many sufficient problematical conclusions which are produced from the lodestone's properties. Gilbert, Book 1, Application. Also the lifeblood, so soon as it is effused out of his warm mineral veins, and tasteth of the cold air, loseth his active virtue, and becometh dead and congealed, except it be with the weapon conveyed unto his ointment, which keepeth it from the cold air, and serveth the spiritual mummy's turn to preserve it, as the filings of steel doth the formal spirit of the lodestone. Baptista Porta and Paracelsus. 2. Problem. Baptista Porta did take a lodestone, and kept it in the filings of steel a good while, and afterwards he found it more vigorous and efficacious in his attractive virtue. Also Paracelsus, by heating a lodestone, and imbibing it with the oil of iron, did increase the vigor of it by many degrees as is said before. Application. In like manner, if the spiritual mummy in the transported blood be but weak or faint, yet if it be kept a while in the animal salve, it will become vigorous, insomuch that it will also animate the whole salve. 3. Problem. Set a magnet of no force or strength that can easily be perceived, upon a lodestone of good strength and vigor, especially upon the poles, and he will shew a vigor as if he were as strong as the lodestone is, whereunto he is united, but after he is taken away, he will be as weak as before, unless it be often done. Application. Also the lifeblood, so soon as it is effused out of his warm mineral veins, and tasteth of the cold air, loseth his active virtue, and becometh dead and congealed, except it be with the weapon conveyed unto his ointment, which keepeth it from the cold air, and serveth the spiritual mummy's turn to preserve it, as the filings of steel doth the formal spirit of the lodestone. 2. Problem. Baptista Porta did take a lodestone, and kept it in the filings of steel a good while, and afterwards he found it more vigorous and efficacious in his attractive virtue. Also Paracelsus, by heating a lodestone, and imbibing it with the oil of iron, did increase the vigor of it by many degrees as is said before. Application. In like manner, if the spiritual mummy in the transported blood be but weak or faint, yet if it be kept a while in the animal salve, it will become vigorous, insomuch that it will also animate the whole salve. 3. Problem. Set a magnet of no force or strength that can easily be perceived, upon a lodestone of good strength and vigor, especially upon the poles, and he will shew a vigor as if he were as strong as the lodestone is, whereunto he is united, but after he is taken away, he will be as weak as before, unless it be often done. Application. So also if the spirits transported with the blood be planted on a sound and balsamic unguent, it will gather strength. But if the unguent be either wiped or pared, or melted off from the weapon, it will immediately lose his force. And again, if it be freshly anointed, and covered warm, it will be forthwith recreated again, as is said before. Moreover, this is also confirmed by this problem mentioned before. 4. Problem. If a weak magnet be rubbed at his poles with a stronger lodestone, he will be bettered by it in his vigor and virtue, if not augmented therein. 5. Problem. A stronger and bigger lodestone doth augment the force of a lesser, if it be put on the pole of the greater magnet, for then will the north pole of it be the more vigorous. Application. The strong blood and spirit in the wounded man by aspect, maketh the weak blood and spirit, which is transplanted in the ointment, to operate magnetically, and to apply and direct the spirit of the unguent unto it strongly, which it would not do without the union which it hath with its fountain, which is more lively, agile, and robust. The eighth member of the proposition, with his proofs. The eighth member of this proposition is, that in all magnetical operations there must be a reciprocal application or aspect, made between the lover and the beloved, as between the matter or feminine which coveteth, and the form or male which is coveted, and by a likeness or continuation of form all spirits, like is united unto his like, which acteth in the matter. So the boreal spirit, with his unctuous material body, covereth and allureth effectually the formal and aquanoctial beams, or emanating spirit of the wound, and directeth the unctuous magnet to bring to pass the effect of his concupiscence, which is easily effected, being that there is a continuation between their spirits. But to our proofs, certain problematical demonstrations to confirm this problem. 1. Problem. The magnetical coition is an act of the lodestone and the iron, not of one but of both, like man and wife. Application. As the woman that is colder, and of a more northern nature, doth covet the man which is of a hotter and southern disposition, so also by a sympathetical likeness in either spirit, they meet and unite their seeds of affection. In the very like manner, the cold spirit in the congealed blood coveteth the hot spirits of the lively and active blood, and after each of them are met, they unite natures, and procreate a third as a child, which partaketh of them both. 2. Problem. He first virtue of the primary form in the iron was at the first distinct but is now confused by the fusion or melting of his body, when the magnetical or iron vein was examined. And yet nevertheless, after that a whole and strong lodestone is applied unto, it returneth again unto his former act. For his form being disposed and ordered with the magnet, they both do conjoin together sociable forces, consenting magnetically and mutually unto unity in all motions, and are joined together without any corporeal contact, and consequently are made all one. Application. The selfsame is the reason of contraries, and therefore the selfsame may be said touching the extremity of cold, which is, in the problem, reported of the extremity of heat. We say therefore that the blood, which whilst it was in his natural vein, was distinct in his action, is now by pouring it out into the cold air, made confused, and void of any manifest formal action, but when by the assistance of the ointment it is stirred up, and applied again, unto the spiritual emanation of the strong blood, it is rectified again, and doth conjoin his nature with the adopted power it hath from the ointment, and so a union of both natures is made, whereby the wound's spirit doth participate with the balsamic nature of the mummy. Again, in the true nature of the said problem, without any conversion of proposition, the bloody spirit in the unguent became confused through overmuch heat, as it appeareth by Mr. James Viret his experiment, in holding the lancet by the fire after it had wounded, and was anointed. 3. Problem. 2 lodestones being disposed into severed boats and placed on the superficies of the water, if they be sufficiently placed within the orbs of their virtues, they will with mutual affection prepare themselves for a meeting, and at the last embrace or adhere unto one another. Also if an iron be fitted in one bark and a lodestone in another, the iron will hasten in the very same manner unto the lodestone, and also the lodestone being in his bark, will move unto the iron, insomuch that either of them are carried from their places in such a manner, that at the last they are joined together, and so do rest, as being well satisfied and contented in their loves. The like also will be effected, if 2 wires, excited by the lodestone, be put through like corks, and placed on the water to swim. For you shall see them make love to one another, and moving by little and little, they will sensibly meet, and with their ends strike and touch one another. Application. In like manner, the northern or congealed blood or bloody transported mummy, by the conduct of his unctuous vehicle, which is also by his presence made magnetic, doth covet the southern union, of the living and moving bloody spirits of the wounded, as matter doth the form, or the female doth the male. And because the spirit is continuated betwixt them both, as the air is continuated betwixt the North Pole, and the equinoctial and the great world, though each extremity be of different natures, namely the one cold and dry, congelative, attractive and immobile, the other hot and moist, dissolutive, discursive and mobile or agile, therefore they easily do concur, and meet with a sympathetical embracing. 4. Problem. The natural union of magnetical spirits is when the condition is made by contrary parts, as by the pole north or south. Application. So the northern blood or the spirits in the transported blood, that are congealed and have assumed a northern property, will easily concur with spirits of a southern or equinoctial nature, namely with the spirits of the lively fountain from whence they come, being that like doth naturally covet his like, especially when it is compassed about by the cold and crude air, and so constrained to contract itself with its airy vehicle from his cold adversary. For spirits that are derived from the equinoctial, do eschew by a natural instinct, even as the airy nature doth, the chilled disposition of the earth. And therefore being fled or contracted into the center, it draws unto it the lively beams of the southern blood. This is the reason in the macrocosm, that when the north wind bloweth strongly, and the south wind not so strongly, the air is oftentimes condensed into a cloud by the contraction of the fiery formal, and equinoctial or astral beams in the air so condensed, which by reason of the outward cold, do fly from the air's circumference unto the center. Insomuch, that for this reason oftentimes it is seen, that it breaketh out into lightnings and coruscations. This contraction also in the included air, when the external air is cold, is easily discerned in effect, by the weather glass, namely when the water is drawn up, and the included air contracted or coworked into a narrow room. The ninth member of the proposition, with his proofs. The ninth member of the proposition is, that the strong attractive faculties of every magnet is of a northern condition, or boreal property, and consequently hath his chief attractive faculty from the pole star, and therefore after the manner of the lodestone, it draweth from the circumference unto the center. Again, all things coveted or beloved, forasmuch as they are formal, do participate of the equinoctial faculty, which emitteth beams by dilatation from the center, and therefore their union by application maketh a mixture of temper, which is between the northern pole and the equinoctial, that is partly attractive and partly dilative, as is man's vital spirit, which acteth in systole and diastole, or contraction and dilatation, even such is the act of magnetical coition. Certain problematical demonstrations to confirm this member. First I will prove unto you demonstratively, and that by a relation made unto the lodestone, that the most vigorous magnetical attraction is from the North Pole, and consequently, that by the blood's inducing of a northern and congelative faculty, it must needs become most attractive and contractive of his like. As we see that the movable and thin expanded air becometh thick snow, when the north wind doth blow, or ice, or frost, or hail. 1. Problem. The North Pole is always the most vigorous and strong pole, to all magnetical purposes, if he have the quantity the South hath. Application. Therefore the bloody spirit enduing the nature of the North, is most efficacious to operate upon the Southern nature magnetically or attractively. 2. Problem. The lodestone draweth the iron more strongly from the North Pole than any point else of the said stone. Application. This confirmeth the foresaid problem. To conclude, the magnetical attraction of the northern blood is the cause of planting the light of more spirits in the unctuous magnet, whereby it is made stronger in his operation. 3. Problem. The lodestone hath his points, that is to say his true poles, in the which do abide his greatest virtue, and for this cause it doth not attract the iron with equal force from every part, and also the magnetical subject doth not move or flow unto every part of the magnet. 4. Problem. The parts that are nearest the North Pole are the strongest in attraction, and the parts that are remote are observed to be the weaker and more infirm in their drawing virtue. Demonstration. Now that the greatest attractive virtue is from the north, I demonstrate it many ways. And first, if we shall hang up a long piece of iron by a thread, the northern part of the world will attract unto it, the end of it, so that it will stand directly north and south. Secondly, if a wire of 4 or 5 inches in length be thrust through a cork and touched by the lodestone, and the cork be put into the water, the northern star will suck the end of the iron unto it. Thirdly, if a long iron be forged north and south, and so be laid to cool in the same situation, it will be animated and endued with the virtue of the pole, and move in the air, being hung up by a thread, or put into a boat on the water, and it will be drawn by the north, and have as it were a coition with the north star. Fourthly, if a long piece of clay newly burnt doth cool north and south, it will then receive a magnetical power from the earth and pole. Fifthly, set 2 lodestones with their poles of one denomination, namely the north pole or south pole of each, at each end of a piece of clay, while it cooleth, and both ends will be of one nature. Sixthly, put a piece of clay of a long form into the fire, and afterwards let it cool north and south, and it will receive a polar virtue. After that burn it again, in the fire, and let that end which cooled first north, cool now south, and it will be changed into the nature of the south, and the other into the nature of the north. Application. By the first therefore of these problems and experiments, it is apparent that the fountain of vigorous attraction is from the pole, because the property of northern cold is to attract, and therefore the bloody spirit enduing the nature of the north becometh magnetical, as well as that of clay or iron. I will come now therefore to demonstrate the effect that this northern spirit and the southern do make by their mutual concourse and union, as we see that the northern and southern pole by their intermediate concourse do produce an equinoctial nature, which is vernal and temperate, that is to say hot and moist, as is the living blood, so that a media natura or mean nature, which participates of both extremes, is produced between the confluence of their aspect or application, which receiveth from the one, and communicateth with the other. My magnetical proofs are these. 5. Problem. 2 magnetical bodies being joined together at their poles, those 2 poles that touch together, have the nature of the equator or equinoctial, and will not excite or hold a needle thus touching. Application. The northern or contracted bloody spirit, joining by application with the southern equinoctial, or lively or dilated one, will endue by this conjunction an equinoctial nature, which will have relation unto each extremity, namely, by receiving from the ointment spirits, and giving or imparting them sympathetically unto the wound. The 10th member of the proposition, with his proofs. The 10th member of the proposition is, that by a lively southern spirit, a portion of his like being made, by a fusion of it into the open and cold air, weak, drooping, northern or congealed, may, after transplantation, be revived, quickened, and corroborated, and so by returning again unto his southern or equinoctial nature, may, by a sympathetical union, be made all one homogeneal nature with the lively bloody spirit, conferring along with it by little and little the nature of the plant or animal mass in which he is grafted, and so may cause each extreme. Certain problematical demonstrations to confirm this member. 1 problem. If a magnet of no force or strength, that can easily be discerned, be set on the pole of a lodestone that is strong, he will shew a vigor, as if he were as strong as the lodestone is, whereunto he is united, but after he is taken away he will be as weak as before, unless it be often done. Application. The southern blood penetrating through the unctuous magnet, doth animate it, and by animation doth revive it, and as well preserving the transplanted spirit from the external air's inclemency, as calefacting or heating of it by his attracted southern nature, it doth revive again the dead spirits of the fainting blood so transported, even as we see the spirits in the dead grain of wheat buried in the earth, is by the earth animated with the sunbeams, being revived as it were, from death to life. But if that a part of the ointment be taken away from the place of the weapon, where the blood doth stick or the bloody spirits did penetrate, then will the revived spirits faint again, and the wound will be dolorous as it was before the blood was buried in the ointment, even as also, if the earth be removed from the vigorous spirits in the dead grain, they will fade, and the plant will not grow and multiply. But if the ointment, animated as before, be reapplied, the wound will prosper and heal without pain. No otherwise also then, if the earth that was removed from the revived spirit in the grain, be reapplied unto it, suddenly it will prosper again. 2 problem. If a weak magnet be rubbed at one of his poles with a stronger magnet, it will be bettered by it in vigor and virtue, if not augmented therein. Application. This typical proof doth confirm also exactly the same member, namely, the lively spirits will vigorate fainting ones. 3 problem. The magnet will lose some of his attractive virtue, and will, as it were, languish with old age, if it be long exposed unto the open air, and be not put again, and reserved or buried in the filings of iron. Application. So also man's blood effused out of his mind, and exposed into the open air, doth languish and becometh weak, if it be not preserved in the weapon salve which is of his nature. 4 problem. One iron being touched doth recreate another, and instructed unto magnetical motions. Application. So the mummial unguent, animated by the emitted beams of the lively blood, doth recreate, incite, and corroborate the spirits in the transported blood. The 11th member of this proposition, with his proofs, the 11th member is, that the alteration of the air doth operate equally upon either extreme, which is an evident argument of a continued unity in spirit, between the transplanted blood in the ointment, and the wound, so that what passion the distempered or uncement air operateth in the one, is felt by the other, no otherwise, than if a thread be tied at both ends of a gallum. The one end being touched, the other end doth sympathize, or act likewise by consent, which is an evident argument, that the air is the medium or vehicle, in which the spiritual influence doth pass, and that the said formal, celestial, or influential spirit which is carried in it, doth, by an immediate contact, communicate with the distempers of its airy vehicle, and, by consequence, it is by that means changed by turns and by portions, into a northern or southern disposition. And therefore by the external air's cold, it sucketh spirits from the wound, and leaveth it distempered and dolorous, it being by that kind of attraction deprived of some natural heat. So that sympathy is turned into antipathy, as it appeareth, when the ointment is taken off from the wounding place of the weapon, either totally or in part, as is said before. Certain problematical demonstrations to confirm this member. 1 problem. In the weather glass, so often mentioned before, you shall find between the bolt's head or mattress above, and the water below, a continued air in the neck of the glass, and you must imagine that such included air is not without his sulphureous spirits, which by dilatation of themselves, do also dilate the airy vehicle they are in. And with the dilated vehicle the water is stricken down, and by contraction of themselves the airy vehicle is also contracted, and the water is sucked up. And yet we see, that the air which is between both extremes, is all one continued air from the one extreme unto the other, and therefore much more the occult and celestial sulphurous spirit, which dwelleth and acteth within it, and is as the soul in a body, in toto and in qualibet parte, and that indivisibly or not separated into parts. And because this included acting spirit being but one in number, is derived from the soul of the world, look as the general worketh in the great world, namely, from the north or from the south, even so also doth this member of the general operate in his included air. For if the Catholic spirit of the world acteth or breathe from the north, and bringeth forth in the air congealative and contractive effects, then the central spirit in the glass doth operate likewise after the same manner, for it contracteth his vehicle, and sucketh up the water. But if the world's Catholic spirit bloweth from the south, then is the air, before contracted, now again dilated, And then also will the included formal spirits in the glass operate after the same fashion, and dissipate or extend out their airy vehicle in a larger proportion or manner, as by ocular observation you may discern in the said instrument. 2. Problem. The north wind blowing in the great world, continueth the essence of his blast from north to south, but the nearer that it approacheth the equinoctial line, the more weak is his effect in contraction and condylation, agreeing in this with the magnet or lodestone, whose parts the nearer they are unto the pole, the more potent are they in their operative or attractive power, and the farther they are off the more infirm and debil they are. But this emanating spirit from the north to the equinoctial is one and the same spirit in essence, although in property it varieth in his parts. Likewise the south wind having dominion, doth send out from the equinoctial unto the north his blast, without any discontinuance of his essence. And yet the nearer it approacheth unto the north, the weaker is his force in dilatation and dissolution, and yet the spirit is one and the same in essence with that of the north. For it is but one anima mundi, or vivifying spirit of the world. 2. Problem. The north wind blowing in the great world, continueth the essence of his blast from north to south, but the nearer that it approacheth the equinoctial line, the more weak is his effect in contraction and condylation, agreeing in this with the magnet or lodestone, whose parts the nearer they are unto the pole, the more potent are they in their operative or attractive power, and the farther they are off the more infirm and debil they are. But this emanating spirit from the north to the equinoctial is one and the same spirit in essence, although in property it varieth in his parts. Likewise the south wind having dominion doth send out from the equinoctial unto the north his blast, without any discontinuance of his essence. And yet the nearer it approacheth unto the north, the weaker is his force in dilatation and dissolution, and yet the spirit is one and the same in essence with that of the north, for it is but one anima mundi, or vivifying spirit of the world, which the Platonists esteem to have his dwelling in the sun. And David saith he put his tabernacle in the sun, and therefore the winds are called by some Titanae filii, the sons of Titan or the sun. And the prophet argueth as well the unity as the omnipotency of this vivifying spirit, where he saith, Veni, spiritus, aquatur ventus, et insuffla interfectos istos, ut reviviscunt, come spirit from the four winds and breathe upon these slain persons that they may live. Where he argueth, that it is but one essential spirit, which filleth the world, and is in everything of the world, but after a manifold property. The conclusive application. We conclude therefore, that the spirit in the wounded man's blood, not exhausted, and that in the blood exhausted, is all one spirit in essence. Howsoever it vary in property, and therefore being continuate and indivisible in essence, it is no marvel though it acteth from one extreme unto another diversely, namely magnetically and attractively from the ointment, for there by reason of its absence from the southern or lively blood in the body, it endueth a northern nature, and sucketh, or attracteth his like. Being emanated in the air, and the southern pole or equinoctial point by dilatation, sendeth out his spirit to be attracted. And so there is made a communication betwixt the balsamic nature, and the wounded the selfsame spirit operating diversely. And I will express unto you a notable example in the great world. When the sun is beyond the equinoctial southward, then is the northern nature most powerful in attraction, congelation, and inspissation on this side the equinoctial. As contrariwise the southern nature is most vigorous and efficacious in dilatation, dissolution, and subtiliation. And yet you shall plainly discern how one and the same spirit in the world doth operate from the one extreme unto the other. For when the sun in the south doth dilate the air and the waters there, which the precedent winter had thickened and incrussated by attraction of cold, and by dilatation doth dissipate it, then that air and water so dissipated requireth a larger place, and flieth from the aspect of the sun northward. And again, the northern property of the same spirit, being now in the winter time most potent, doth by attraction suck and direct magnetically those spirits, which are chased from the south, and the nearer it draweth them unto the pole, the more suddenly it condenseth them into clouds, which by reason of the sulphureous nature which it bringeth from the summer or equinoctial, do immediately dissolve themselves into rains. And this is the reason that the southern winds are so rise among us in the winter, and consequently that we have so much rain in that season, so that we may see how the double property of one and the same spirit doth operate at one and the same time, about the effecting of one and the same thing, in one and the same Catholic air of the world, as I have told you before in my foregoing discourse. As also, in the ascending or descending of fountains in each hemisphere, the like is effected, all which is most lively demonstrated and performed in the weather glass, as I have expressed before. Whereby it is confirmed, that being the microcosmical spirit is all one in condition, with the macrocosmical, it followeth that though the body of it be divided, yet the spirit remains indivisible, and can dilate and contract itself at any extension, as is proved by the properties of the two contrary winds, whose spirit is continued from both extremities, and by the small pieces in the lodestone, which have their complete poles as well as the whole. Also by this a man may see that this spirit's operation is not to be limited by any of the peripatetic's imaginary sphere of activity, and consequently that it may work at any distance, being directed and guided by a right and homogeneal magnet, that is to say, agreeing at the leastwise in speciality, if not in individuality or both, as the blood of the wounded which is transplanted, and that in the body, both which are identity in nature, and also as is the lusnia and mummy in the ointment which is of the same specific, though not of the individual. You see therefore how plainly this business, or the foresaid proposition, hath been demonstrated, as well by the lodestone, as the natural practice in the great world, and in practice of the weatherglass, which I term my demonstrative instrument. But because there are some strange accidents which happen in this cure by chance and unlooked for, a reason whereof could never hitherto be expressed, I will speak a word or two of them in a second proposition, and so I will end this chapter. The second proposition. It hath been observed in the cure of wounds by the weapon salve, that if there happen in the time of the cure any issue of blood from some other part of the wounded man, as bleeding at the nose, pissing of blood, or by some other wound, or else if he have to do with any menstruous woman in the meantime, the force of the ointment will be diverted, and the efficacy of it will stand but in little stead, and the reason that I can give is, because the southern bloody spirit, which reigning in the veins did emit and direct his beams unto the ointment, was easily attracted and imbibed by the ointment. But when that spirit is diverted and turned another way, and is attracted by a contrary magnetical subject, then will a divorce, as it were, be made by the second magnet, betwixt the emanating spirit and the attractive in the ointment. And I will maintain and demonstrate this to be true, by this magnetical experiment. A problem to confirm the proposition out of Gilbert, Book 2, on the Magnet, Chapter 31. Two lodestones or irons excited, rightly cohering, by the coming of another fresher and stronger lodestone or iron excited, do make an abort, and the new comer will easily drive away the other with a contrary face, and will command him, and so the endeavor or the desire of the other two which were first joined, will end. Application. Thus you see how fitly these two do concur, namely the fore-recited animal act, with these of the mineral. I end this chapter with this assertion. Spirits that have their subtiliation and action from natural heat, do act livelily, so long as they abide within the sensible orbi of light's calefacting beams, being stirred up a centro ad circumferentium. But if the said spirits depart or wander out of the orbi of light, and are environed by the cold act of darkness, then they contract themselves from the circumference unto the center, and so resting in the center, do cease to act except they be incited or provoked by the virtue of heat, which doth subtiliate, and by subtiliation make both extremes alike. As is proved by the weatherglass and by blood issuing out of the wound, etc., as is said before. Wherefore I will boldly conclude, that the spirits of the blood conveyed either in the body of the blood, or sucked up into the wounding weapon, or in a stick, knitting needle, probe or such like, may be evoked, extracted or revived, and united unto his fountain, partly by preserving it from the external air's inclemency, till it be dissevered by comfortable warm heat of his kind, and partly by the lively coition, or concurrence and conjunction of his like, by a favorable and salutary aspect. I have been too tedious in this chapter, and yet not longer than the business doth rightly deserve, considering how the world hath been puzzled, and all philosophers put to their wits' end, about the due search and inquiry of this curing exploit, forasmuch as they in the conclusion were able to say so little, and to demonstrate less to prove this manner of cure to be natural, that they gave way without controlment, unto the rash and temerarious censures of such self-conceited persons, as would have this kind of cure to be only cacomagical and diabolical, which they insultingly go about therefore to maintain, because great appearing philosophers which did write in the defense of this subject could say so little, and to so small purpose unto the contrary. I will speak a few words concerning some other histories, which are, and may be referred unto the self-same manner of cure. Chapter 7. How it is possible by natural and sympathetical operation, that a disease in the blood may be cured, only by transplantation of the excrements thereof at a far distance into a vegetable earth, not vegetating but comforting the infected nature, by mortifying of the disease. The proposition. It is possible that an infectious disease in the blood and body may be cured by transplanting of the excrementitious way of the blood, to wit, of the sick party's urine at a far distance, in the ashes of a vegetable, which is proper to comfort nature, and to kill and destroy the infection which doth debilitate it. An experimental history to confirm this. There is a noble man of no mean rank, and very wise, religious, and one of the best esteem, who useth commonly to cure the yellow jaundice at the distance sometimes of 100 miles. And that only by means of the sick party's urine translated unto him, and the manner is this: he taketh the ashes of a certain tree, commonly known among us here in England, and mingleth the urine with it, and causeth his man to mold it up in the form of a paste, the which is divided into lumps, which he causeth to be framed up into 3, 7, or 9 balls, and in the top of each of the said balls he maketh a hole, and puts a blade of saffron into each hole, and so filleth up the hole with the said urine, and then he putteth or disposeth these balls into a secret place, where no body may meddle with them. And immediately the jaundice in the patient, be he further or nearer off from the place of the medicine, will by little and little fade and wear away. And this experiment hath been tried on above 100 poor and rich, and many of them were such as physicians have despaired of. This not only he but also the noble ladies his daughters, who for God's sake have in this case done good to many poor people, do affirm to be true. And thus much I can affirm myself, that being called unto a chirurgeon's wife, anno 1637, after that other doctors had been with her, but to little purpose, who was filthily infected with this disease, and having used some medicines but to little purpose, at her request, I sent her man into the country with a letter unto that noble personage, to implore his help. But in the interim that the urine was sent, the woman was persuaded by some sincere fools, that it was witchcraft which made her half mad, and to rave, and to use her man hardly at his return, whereupon I sent a messenger forthwith to desire his lordship, to undo what he had caused to be done, because of the ingratitude of the woman. He sent me word, that he would but, said he, it will be but in vain, for it will cure her, do now what I can, and indeed she amended immediately upon it. Also there was a noble lady, daughter unto a lord, who was much infected with the same disease, and finding that usual remedies and physic did her little or no good, I sent her water unto the said noble earl, who did his endeavor, but when I found that the disease did stick still upon her, though her urine did amend in color, I took horse, and did certify that noble personage of the small effect the medicine had. He wished me to send it again, and the sick lady did send her water the second time, and did forthwith begin to mend, and within a few days was perfectly well. There is another who, unto my knowledge, hath cured 40% of this disease, by boiling of their water or urine away on a gentle fire, things far enough from either superstition or witchery. Certain problematical demonstrations, to confirm the probability of this proposition. One problem, the nails and hair of the sick party being taken, and put into a hole that is bored in an oka, and the oka being stopped up with a peg of the same wood, cureth an atrophiatical or wasted member, as is proved before. Application? And therefore much more the serous matter which is separated from the blood, because the essential vegetable salt of the blood in the specific, in which are some scintilles or sparks, is mingled with it. And by virtue of them, there is a continuated sympathy or respect between the salt and sulfur in the balls, and the infected blood. For the spirit in the urine is as continuated with that in the blood, as was the spirit of the wounded and the ointment, so that by a continuity and union of consent, the curative faculty of the vegetable ashes doth operate spiritually, as well upon the infected blood in the body, as upon the urine. And therefore that is the reason, that as the salt in the ashes do work on the salt in the urine, so do both of them communicate their forces by a mutual consent, through the reason of the same continuity, unto the blood, so that as the virtue of the plant with the saffron do kill and poison the infection in the urine, so also, by the mutual consent which is betwixt the two infecting extremes, namely the blood and the urine, the infection also in the blood is observed by little and little to die, wither, and decay. But I will produce unto you a magnetical problem, to confirm the possibility of this proposition. 2 problem. 2 lodestones rightly cohering at opposite poles, by the coming of a stronger lodestone or iron incited, do make an abort, and the newcomer will easily drive away the other which is with a contrary face, and will command him, and so the coherence or union of the other two will cease or end. Application? So that union which was made between the spirit infected, with the corrupting humor and the corrupted blood is separated, and the unnatural is forced to fly and depart from the natural, by the help of another, which is more potent than the unnatural, which is less homogeneal, and proper to rectify and purify by the union of his spirit, the impurity in the natural blood, and to kill and mortify the corrupter in the urine. I need not to say much more for the proof hereof, being that the precedent chapter doth fully confirm, and that by relation had unto the lodestone, and weatherglass, in every particle of this proposition, being that as blood is transplanted from the wounded party's fountain of blood, and, as it were, grafted on the ointment, so also is the urine with bloody spirits, transferred from the bloody fountain in the icteritious person, and is planted or placed in a bed of salutary ashes, from whence it operateth no otherwise in the living blood, than the blood or spirits in the ointment do, in the veins of the wounded person. I will now proceed unto the microcosmical magnet, which is taken out of the living man, and I purpose to describe unto you briefly, and in general terms, the wonderful effects in sympathy, which it produceth by his extraction of the spiritual mummy out of man's body, and by the transplantation and right application thereof. Chapter 8. Wherein the secret magnet, which is extracted out of the microcosm, or man yet living, is in general terms mentioned, with the manner of his attraction or extraction, of the spiritual mummy out of man, and the application, and as well the antipathetical as sympathetical operation thereof. I will now in few words relate unto you a history of the abstruse manner of healing by transplantation, which, if it be rightly considered, it doth far surpass that of the weapon salve, for it doth not only cure at distance, as that doth, but it operateth that feat, by the vegetative spirit of the plant. And yet I hope that my story shall no way sound unto wise men's ears as cacamagical, but only naturally magical, and therefore ordained by God to be wrought upon in the right use thereof. for man's good and salutary benefit. For unto that end did the Spirit of wisdom teach those which were inclined unto wisdom as well, those things which are occult and hidden, as such as are manifest and apparent unto man's sense. And because that good things may by abuse be converted unto evil and unlawful purposes, as a sword, to kill as well as to save, as shall be told you hereafter. Therefore is it God's will, that these mysteries should be hid from the unlearned, or at least wise from such of the vulgar, as are wickedly minded, and ordained them to be laid open unto such as are honest, wise, and discreet. But leaving all preambles, I will come to the point and proceed with that style and method in which I began. The general proposition. There may be extracted out of a living man, without any prejudice unto his health, a magnet, which by a several application of it unto convenient parts of the body, will draw or suck out according unto the pleasure of the applier the animal, vital, or natural spiritual mummy, out of one and the same living man, and that without any detriment unto his person, the which being rightly with the magnet that imbibed it transplanted and made vegetative, will operate as well by an internal administration as at a far distance, or by a spiritual emanating relation, after it be duly ordered and adapted, both to the health and preservation, and infection, and damage, and destruction of mankind. An explication of every member of this proposition. This proposition doth consist of many members, whereof the first toucheth the generation, condition, and preparation of the magnet. The second, the manner of application, for the extraction of the spiritual mummy. The third, openeth the fashion of a manifold transplantation of that mummy, being so extracted, and lastly, as well the usages as the abuses thereof. Of all which particles or members thus in order. Of the Macrocosmicall magnet, we term this the Macrocosmicall magnet, because it hath the properties of the mineral lodestone, and it may therefore easily be conjectured and guessed, by such as are wise in their apprehension what it is, by comparing the animal magnet with that of the mineral. For as the mineral magnet is not of a natural but monstrous birth, for it is not engendered of like and equal genitors, but is begotten after the manner of the mule, being that her mother or passive corporeal mass is a common saturnine and stony Mercury, but his father or active form is a metalline sulphurous martial spirit. So also this our Macrocosmicall magnet doth consist of a sulphurous martial spirit, being as it were his formal father, and of a strange or foreign Mercury, which is nevertheless a near neighbor in position and condition unto the Macrocosmicall Mercury, as his passive or mercurial matter. As for the mine of which it is extracted, it is the living man, and it is taken or derived from him without any prejudice unto his health, and after a certain preparation of it, it is made a fit magnet, to suck or draw unto it the spiritual mummy out of the living man, and that without any detriment unto his health. The manner of this magnet's application for the extraction of the spiritual mummy. As for the manner of its application, it is this. We take the magnet so prepared, and if we would extract the animal's mummial spirits, we must apply it unto those places which are aptest for their evacuation. As for example, if we desire the mummy of the vital parts, then we must adapt our magnet to suck at that place, which nature hath ordained to purge the vital region. Lastly, if we would have the natural spiritual mummy, we must apply it unto that place of the body, out of which nature is accustomed to send forth the spiritual fumes, or sweaty evacuations from that member, namely from the liver. To conclude, if you would make a general medicine, which should respect the animal, vital, and natural parts all at once, then must your magnet be applied unto them all, and after that it hath sucked a sufficient proportion, then ought you to reserve it, for to make your transplantation. The act of transplantation of the spiritual mummy. Touching the act or manner of transplantation, Paracelsus saith, that the extracted spiritual mummy doth not operate unto health and preservation, but by mineral, vegetable, and animal means. And therefore it is necessary, that the spiritual mummy extracted or extracted out of the body, by the virtue of the animal magnet, must be introduced into a vegetative nature, whereby the said mummy, not being of itself vegetative, may by adoption, as it were, be introduced into, and be endued with a vegetative nature or condition. We ought therefore to mingle a proportion of this imbibed magnet, with a certain proportion of his mother earth, and sow in this composition the seeds of such herbs, as are proper for this or that disease, and this or that ill-affected principal part of man's body, or this or that infirm member, which is contained in his region. As for example for the lungs in the vital region, when the disease is the phthisis, sow-line seed or juniper; in the natural region, when it is dropsy, pimpernel or wormwood; in the bruising or contusion of parts, hypericon or plantain; in tumor or wounds, persicaria, or the great or lesser comfrey; in salt diseases as are the toothache, pain in the eyes and flowing menstrues, persicardia maculata, and so forth. The herbs must grow in this compounded earth, and that in the open air, and as the herb or plant groweth, it will sympathetically and magnetically extract the imbibed mummial spirits out of the magnet, and will by that means cause the mummy extracted out of every particular member, according unto his condition, to be fit to cure the infirmity of his proper member. Of the use and virtue of the transplanted mummy. Lastly, as concerning the manner how to use this transplanted mummy, now that it is changed into a vegetable nature or condition. If the disease be dry and of a combust nature, as is the yellow jaundice, the physic, etc., and you would cure it or expel it out of the body, then take the herb with his magnetic earth, and cast them into the running water, and the disease will fade and die by little and little. But if the disease be moist, then you must burn the herb with the magnetical earth. Again, if the disease be more temperate, namely between the extremities of water and fire, then hang up the herb in the air or smoke to dry, and the disease will languish by little and little, as the herb doth fade. If you shall give the herb or fruit unto the beast that is of a stronger nature than the sick, then the beast will be infected with that disease, and the sick will be free. Also if the spiritual mummy so extracted, out of some peculiar member of a sound man, be conserved in his continual vegetation, if you take of his fruit, and transplant it into a sound oaken tree, by that means the member out of which the mummy was extracted, will grow continually, and continue in his natural and robust proportion of vegetation, without defect. After this manner also are the willow trees, but that they increase so suddenly, and by reason thereof, they are not so fit for this purpose, lest the member should grow too hastily, for by that means, many inconveniences may follow. As for example, if after that manner the hair of a person be shut up into a willow tree, they will grow so suddenly and so copiously, that unless they be removed thence, or the willow be burned, the eyes and brains will endure damage and detriment, as dollars, fluxes, and namely, by the sudden increase, or too much humidity of the tree, and therefore according unto the proportion of the person, there must be a proportionate tree found out, into the which the mummy is to be transplanted, but the oki is to be elected before all others, because it increaseth and groweth but temperately and strongly, and a man's life will not easily exceed the days of an oki. By this mystical kind of attraction, the true and wise natural magician may bring to pass such things, which in wonder will excel by many degrees, the power or act of the weapon's salve. For by it wise men have procured friendship and love, between such as have been utter enemies, and again by the use of it, grace and affection may be recovered from another whose favor is desired. Paracelsus, speaking darkly of this mummial faculty, doth shew how the ape and the snake may be made friends, and familiar unto one another, but to our purpose. If the members out of the which the second mummy is extracted are to be corroborated, then you must make the extracted mummy to vegetate as before by transplantation temperately, and according unto the natural proportion in the oak or other such like sound tree. But if the members be too dry, then let their extracted mummy vegetate in the willow tree, so also in humid complexion, transplanted into some other temperate tree. It may for a time be transplanted into a hot and slowly growing tree, as is the juniper, only observing that the fruit in which the mummy is transplanted be preserved from all external damage. Demonstration. I need not waste the time in further demonstration of the possibility and feasibility of these acts in the spiritual transplanted mummy, when by the very self-same proofs, whereby I have confirmed the manner of curing by the weapon salve, and by transplantation, which is set down in one of the chapters of this present book, I have fully demonstrated the reasons of the occult and abstruse actions in this kind of cure, unto such as will not believe anything but what is confirmed by sense. And therefore for the manifestation of this hidden action, by a relation of natures, I refer you unto that very place also, where the salve is compared unto the vegetable and magnet, the bloody spirits unto the spiritual mummy, the manner of application of beams from the mummy to the sick member, unto the application of the transplanted bloody spirits to the wounded member, the keeping the spiritually growing spirit in the ointment from cold, unto the preserving the vegetable fruit, in which the mummy is transplanted, from external damage. So that idem est ratio uniusque, and by consequence idem est demonstrationis via in ambobis, it is too tedious in this place to express the efficacious operations of this secret mystical mummy, and I am assured that some ignorant momus, or cynical ignorant, will either laugh or bark at what is said already touching it, for, quis major scientia inimicus quam ignorans? And therefore I will conceal the rest of his occult properties, and their sympathetical effects from such critics, and lock it up in the treasury of truth. Only in a word I say that by it the dropsy, pleurisy, gout, vertigo, epilepsy, Frenchpox, palsy, cancer, fistula, foul ulcers, tumors, wounds, herniae, fractions of members, superfluity and suppression of menstrues in women, as also sterility in them, fevers, hectics, atrophy or wasting of members and such like, may by this natural magical means be cured, and that at distance, and without any immediate contact. And, to conclude, Paracelsus affirmeth, that this magnetical kind of cure which is effected by natural magic, doth excel in virtue all other physical secrets, which may be extracted or separated, either out of herbs, or roots or minerals. I will now come to the second part or member of this book, which speaketh of the antipathetical effects of this mummial experiment. Book 3, Part 2. The second part or member of this book, which handleth the practice of antipathy. Chapter 1. In this chapter the author expresseth how by the selfsame internal spirit in the creature, as well antipathetical as sympathetical effects may be produced. Herein is also set down the reason why a spirit that is infected and corrupted with a poisonous condition is most venomous and contagious unto his kind. As 'tis certain, that like doth naturally affect his like, for nature doth rejoice at the presence of his nature, and nature doth correct and corroborate his nature, if it be sound, and full of vivifying and wholesome spirits. So also nature, if it be poisoned and infected by a venomous nature, will, by uniting itself unto a sound and wholesome nature, quickly corrupt and inquinate it, and so by such a kind of abortive and depraved union, antipathy is placed instead of sympathy. Now how this is possible in nature, I will in few words relate unto you, as nature doth magnetically affect and allure unto it her like. So, if that like which it sucketh unto it be inquinated with corruption, the said attracting spirit, be it never so found, will quickly taste of the bitter with the sweet, namely of the poison. And so will also be corrupt equally with that spirit, which is homogeneal unto it, in which the infection dwelleth, being forced unawares to entertain strife, dissension, and antipathy into his tabernacle unawares, even as we see a sound spirit in the animal, which thirsting after his like spiritual celestial food, which hovereth occultly in the air, to be refreshed by it, doth unawares draw in an enemy with it, namely, a pestilent and corrupt fume, whereby it is oppressed and inflamed with a putredinous fire, so that it was not the appetite or desire of the sound spirit to draw in that poison unto it, but the spirit like itself that was poisoned. And again, each spirit which is encumbered with any antipathetical and unnatural accident, desiring to shake off contentious antipathy, and to reassume that peaceful sympathy which it enjoyed before but finding itself unable, it is apt to cleave and adhere unto good and sound spirits for its relief, being that vis unitiva fortior, and if more sound spirits of his like were joined unto it, then might it the easilier conquer and expel his antipathetical adversary. So also we see, that one blear-eyed person, by darting his infectious beams for relief at a reasonable distance, becometh a flame, which setteth on fire the sound spirit unto the which it applieth, for spiritual poisons are like secret flames of malignant fire. Wherefore as spirits are by union joined, together near unto one another, so also are spiritual poisons united like secret flames of malignant fire. Wherefore, if spirits are by union joined together near unto one another, so also are spiritual poisons like flames of malignant fire. Whereupon, if oil be added, wherefore as spirits are by union joined together and multiplied, like oil added unto oil, so doth the infectious flame increase, and feed equally upon them both. For as the sound spirit desireth the society of his like to comfort it, and the corrupted spirit so desired, doth also covet the sound spirit to assist it against his enemy. So corruption is sucked in by them both, and antipathy is forced to roust among them, and forsaketh them not, until it hath penetrated and gnawed into even their bowels, and poisoned their very entrails. And we must note, that there is no poisoned spirit that doth sooner take hold of a spirit, than such as is specific, and of a homogeneal nature, for that is the reason, that one man's spirit being infected with the plague, doth so multiply it in his kind chiefly, as also the murrain doth chiefly rage in the spirits of sheep, and meddles not with the spirits of men. Do we not commonly see that a like nature being altered by putrefaction, is most deadly unto his like? So worms avoided out of the body and dried to powder, do by inward administration kill the worms. Spital that is avoided from the pulmonac, cureth after preparation. The physic, the spleen of a man prepared, is an enemy unto the swelling and vegetable spleen. The stone of the kidney or bladder, by calcination cureth and dissolveth the stone. The touch of a dead man's hand cureth the surest tumors. The scorpion being bruised, or his body macerated in oil, cureth the wounds of the scorpion. And the oil of the viper, as also the trochises of his flesh, the bitings of the adder or viper, dead and congealed blood, and the salt excrescence out of man's bones, is antipathetical unto the flowing blood. In conclusion, there is nothing that is more powerful to check or correct an impediment in a spirit, than by applying of the same specific spirit, being altered from his nature by a contrariety. So also there is nothing that infecteth a sound nature sooner, than a nature homogeneal unto itself, which hath induced corruption. And that is the reason, that the infirm and corrupted mummy of one man, is so apt to putrefy and corrupt that of another, as we may note.
One may discern by these words of Paracelsus. Corrupta mumia, corpus etiam sanum quod attingit, amp cum quo unitur corrumpit. Ea autem sani corporis corruptio, est corruptio alterius, ex quo mumia sumpta est valitudo amp sanitas.
In English, the corrupted mummy doth also corrupt the sound body, that it layeth hold of, and is united unto, and the corruption of the sound body, is the health of the other body, out of which the corrupt mummy was extracted. As for example, if a man be leprous, and I extract, by the microcosmical magnet, the mummy out of him, and give it to a sound man, it will reduce the leprous person unto his health again, but it will filthily infect the sound man that took it with the same disease, as shall be told you hereafter more at large. But before we come unto the bulk of this business, it will be most fit that I make an apologetical transgression, lest some persons of more envy and indiscretion than profundity in the true natural magia may unworthily accuse me of cacamagy, and that only because they are altogether ignorant in the mysteries of those lawful acts in nature, which were taught unto Solomon, and revealed unto the wise men of this world, for the good and benefit of mankind, by the good Spirit of God, neither are they therefore to be eschewed, because that by evil men they may be converted unto evil effects, and so diverted from their true usages, for which God did ordain them, but rather a skillful natural magician, such as a true physician ought to be, should first know the good uses of such hidden mysteries in nature, that they might with the better effect employ them for the good of mankind, and then not be ignorant of those abuses which may be produced by them, that they thereby may the better prevent, and put by, all such wicked effects as naughty men would produce by them, unto the damage and destruction of God's creatures. Chapter 2, An Apology, a short apology for the usage of the mystical or spiritual mummy, and to prove that as well the antipathetical abuses, as sympathetical uses of it, and all other natural things, are to be known and well understood by the natural magician or wise physician for prevention's cause, though not always put in execution, but only where need requireth. I know that there will be many barking cynics, inveighing critics and railing or satirical momuses, whose only delight is fostered with the fire of disdain or malice, who, smothered as it were, with the blind and foggy smoke or fume of ignorance, will say, that if the sympathetical effects of the spiritual mummy be allowable for a physician, yet are the antipathetical properties thereof odious, and no way to be endured, nay they are cacamagical, because the divil doth instruct his ministers, about the abuses of this microcosmical kind of corruption, and therefore for this reason, the very knowledge of such a thing is not to be induced, and so forth. These objections, I know, will these senseless and unreasonable kind of babblers make, touching the knowledge of so mystical a business, but if their saying should take place amongst the wise, what should become of Solomon's skill in natural logic? Or wherefore should he be so overseen, as to aspire unto the knowledge of all things whatsoever, and to understand as well the enemies as friends unto man's nature? For it is said of him that he knew the natures of living creatures, the fierceness of beasts, the cogitations of men, the difference of plants, the virtues of roots, and all things else that were occult and secret. Nay, why should he say that wisdom, the workmistress of all things, taught it unto him? Are there not plants and animals and minerals that are stark poison and venomous unto man's nature, as well as benign and salutiferous? He knew the natures of all living creatures or animals, and why so, if that were true, which those scoffers mutter? Why should he know or look after the property of such things, which are poison and harmful unto mankind? Are not the aspes, the viper, adder, and that purifying or corrupting worm termed seps in Latin or purisseur in French, by reason of his rotting venom? The serpent called dipsus, which infecteth the spirit with an immeasurable drouth, the amphisbaena, the basilic, the dragon, the hulio, among creeping creatures the spider, the scorpion, the toad, the lizard, the salamander, the cantharides, and an infinite number of other, as well earthly as watery animals, venomous and wonderful, pernicious unto mankind? He knew also the differences and virtues of plants. But say these temerarious judges, what reason had wisdom to show and discover unto him the abominable effects of the herb called aconite, which is so pernicious unto man and beast, that the poets feigned that it grew alongst the shore of the venomous river Acheron, in hell, the hemlock, which was the character of death among the Athenians, for with the juice thereof they poisoned the condemned persons. The jusquiame or henbane, the poppy of whose juice the somniferous opium is derived, the toadstool, scamony, euphorbium, coloquintida, bear's foot, titimul or spurge, acerabaca, grunsel, flammula, and an infinity of such like vegetables. Also amongst the minerals, antimony, quicksilver, arsenic, rosalgar, verdigris, litharge, ceruse, vitriol, and an infinity of others? My answer is, that all these things, though in themselves they are venomous, yet being rightly handled and used by wise men, they are made passing medicinable. And I would have them know that God created all things good, but it is the divil and his instruments who by ill employing of them do make them odious, and detestable unto man's nature, for as by their right use and application they may produce sympathetical effects, so by their abuse they produce nothing else but antipathetical effects, and rebellious conflicts with man's nature. God, I say, ordained them for a good use, namely for man's health, but the divil doth apply them destructively and maliciously, which also the foresaid wise natural magician, Solomon, confirmeth in these words, God created all things that they should exist and be, and he made all the nations of the earth sound and durable, so that there was not a destructive medicine in them. Also God created man inexterminable, but it was by the malice of the divil, that death entered into the world, and the wicked imitate him and are of his seed. Whereby it is plain that it was the divil and naughty men which are his instruments, and indeed true divils incarnate, which do adapt that for a wicked use, which indeed is good and righteous in itself. What shall I say more? What? because that the divil doth apply a good thing unto a bad use, must that thing forever be abhorred and eschewed of wise men? And must for that reason the good use thereof be excommunicated out of man's society, and be forever after reputed for cacamagical, damnable, and diabolical? As for example, because the divil and his adherents, I mean the witches and necromancers, do by the divil's instructions, apply the mummy of man as well corporal as spiritual, about their pernicious and destructive inventions, therefore must all they which use the same for a good and salutiferous intent be esteemed cacamagicians? Is it a sign that the physician who cureth diseases by it, hath for that reason a commerce with the divil? Or, must a Christian physician, because he is acquainted with the evil which the properties of natural things may effect, by an unnatural or antipathical adaptation, needs put that evil in execution unto the prejudice of man's health? Verily, if things are rightly considered, the knowledge of good and evil in the creatures do well befit the science of a physician, for except he be acquainted with the evil as well as the good, how is it possible to cure the harms which are effected by the bad, being that except the cause be known, the effect will hardly or never be cured? As for example, if the nature of the spiritual philtre which infecteth be not discovered, how should the cure be performed, or the cause be extinguished or taken away? The true magician doth not intrude into the science of the simple's venomous nature, to do harm thereby, but to discern the counterpoison which should prevent the mischief thereof, as the scorpion cureth the scorpions, the viper's harms. Must every man that hath a sword needs kill, or do a mischief with it? May he not defend another from being killed or harmed? So also it followeth not that he must therefore poison his patient because he knoweth the poison, and the manner how to correct or amend his malice which hath deprived his patient of his health. Except the poison be known, the elixipharmacon or counter-poison will hardly be had. If the hermit of Aix had not known the especial antidote to cure those which he had poisoned and infected with the pestilence, many of those which he afterwards cured would have died with the rest. If there be devils incarnate whose delight is to destroy, God forbid that such natural creatures as are fire, iron, and such like, should be abandoned and not exercised in their right usage, because they do harm when they are abused. There are saints as well as there are devils on the earth, who being acquainted with the impious inventions and devices of these devils, with their archmaster Satan, are able to challenge and combat them at their own weapons. Scholars learn of Aristotle the art of sophistry and fallacy, not that they should deceive, but that they should prevent deception. And the honest and most skillful and faithful physician preeth to the mystery of the most spiritual poison, not with an intent to poison or do any evil by it, but that he may with the greater assurance and vigorous efficacy attempt the cure, and take away the cause after it is known, for the nature of the poison being well understood, the cure will be the more certain. The venomous wound of the viper is cured by the theriacal antidote, into whose composition the flesh of vipers doth enter. The oil of scorpions, or the scorpion of itself being bruised, doth cure the sting of the scorpion, and that by a magnetical attraction of his like. All which being so, why should not the wise physician look into the nature of spiritual venoms, as well as the spiritual counter-poisons that are in man? When we find that the venom that wandeth is, by reason of his homogeneity in nature, the perfectest magnet to suck and draw unto it his like, if by the sound mummy in man, I can cure or take away the corruption or venom, which his like nature hath accidentally imbibed, is it not a fit and convenient thing to know the one as well as the other? I must confess that there are fleshly devils upon earth, I mean, abominable ministers and children of Satan, who being abandoned unto their master and head, commit, as I have told you before, many insolencies and treacherous stratagems by the blood, hair, bones, skin, and corporal mummy of man's body. But above all the rest, the wickedness of certain thieves, hangmen, and other of that necromantical faction, is abominable before God and man, and worthy to be whipped out with iron, or wiped away with fire, out of every good commonwealth which by their diabolical sleights do make use of man's last breath in their expiration of life, to serve for their wicked employment, as spirits made obedient to their wills, and so do disturb the quiet rest of the dying man's spirit.
Of which kind of wicked persons, Paracelsus speaketh thus: Per triplices hasia momias multa pas imprestita, amp confecta sont, abiis comprimis qui illas ipsimet prepararunt, ut sont carnifices, lictores latrones ampc. Non solum vitam hominibus ademerunt ampi jugulatus ipsos momiam fecerunt, sed etiam jugulatorum spiritum, quem spiritum hominis vocaverunt, exceperunt, illumque sibi in extremo mortis momento subieserunt, to subjugaverunt, et si varis impostitis oneribus exagitarunt. Hinc ars in ata est necromantia, per triplices hasim momias multa pas imprestita amp confecta sunt, abiis cum primis qui illas ipsimet prepararunt, ut sunt carnifices lictores latrones ampc. Non solum vitam hominibus ademerunt ampi jugulatus ipsos momiam fecerunt, sed etiam jugulatorum spiritum, quem spiritum hominis vocaverunt, exceperunt, illum sibi in extremo mortis momento subieserunt, so subjugaverunt, et si varis impostitis oneribus exagitarunt. Inca senata est necromentia, telitar ipsis vocata. Ve autem huic arti, esse illis universis qui tam fele illabutuntur. Necromantia quidem ipsa sed diaboli, sua diabolin stilata, docta, tradita assia be ipsius instrumentis so mancipis in abusum tam grandem conversa. Sunt enim illi homines nocentissimi, quibus presta lapidem molarum decollo suspendi, aceita in profundo mar eici.
By these three kinds of mummies, there are many things done and effected, and that especially by such as have prepared them, as are the hangmen, the sergeants and thieves and c. who do not only bereave men of their lives, but also they have received the spirit of those whose throats they have cut, or strangled, and do make them subject, or do subjugate it unto them. From hence springeth the art of necromancy so termed by them. Fie upon this art, and upon all such as are so filthily abused by it. Verily it is necromancy, but of the devil, or it is instilled, taught and delivered by the devil, and is by his instruments or slaves converted into so great an abuse, for these are wicked and harmful persons about whose neck it were better that a millstone were hanged, and that they were with it cast into the bottom of the sea. I am advertised, that the hangmen of Germany are commonly artists in this devilish kind of trade, and by it can do wonders, the more is the pity that they are suffered. Thus, therefore each man may discern a manifest difference between the true use and the abominable abuse of a good thing, and how there are devils incarnate as well as saints or good and pious men upon the earth, whereof some do use God's creatures to the benefit of man, and others unto his ruin and destruction, and consequently that it is lawful for a physician to be conversant in both extremes, though his only practice ought to be employed in doing good. I will now descend unto my subject, chapter 3, how sympathy may by accident or disorder be changed into antipathy. Here also certain magnetical demonstrations, convenient to prove each proposition concerning this subject are expressed. I purpose in this chapter, which toucheth the effects of antipathy, to proceed after the selfsame method, which I observed in my precedent discourse of sympathy, and therefore in the first place I will propose unto you certain grounds, which I for that reason call propositions, and then afterward I will demonstratively maintain them many ways. 1 proposition. As by sympathy in natural spirits, each member may be corroborated and fortified, so by their antipathy, members may be debilitated, corrupted and infected. An experimental example or demonstration. If the spiritual mummy extracted out of man be mingled with venomous things, and so be suffered to rot, or else be mingled with the mummies of infirm or infected persons, or with the poisonsome menstrues of a woman, and then a herb be planted, or the magnet so imbibed, and be conserved in a continual vegetation, it may be a cause that the disease should be of continuance. Also if one give the herb or fruit which favoreth of a sick man's mummy, unto a beast that is of a stronger nature than the sick, then the beast will be infected with that of a stronger nature than the sick. Then the beast will be infected with that disease, and the sick will be free. From this experiment, many egregious abuses may and would be effected by wicked men, if this manner of diverting the creature's virtue from good to bad were known unto them. For by it they may disseminate agues and the pestilence over a whole country, for the plant will suck out the spiritual mummy of such persons as are infected with such venomous diseases, by reason of its vegetating activity. Also, if the spiritual mummy be extracted by means of this microcosmical magnet, out of a body infected with a leprosy, and be applied, or any way administered inwardly unto another, that is healthful and sound, it will infect the sound person, and free the infected, as it hath been proved by some. 2 proposition. The antipathetical mummy of the sick may be extracted, and infected or infused into another that is sound. A demonstrative example. This is confirmed by the precedent proofs, and is further maintained thus. If one do sow seeds or herbs pertaining unto the 3 principal members in the mummy of a dead carcass, or in the mummy extracted out of a sick or infected person, and the fruit of these vegetables be given or administered unto man or beast, then the disease will be transplanted upon the said man or beast. By this means also naughty men may infect and poison. But because these mischiefs are horrible to a religious spirit, I dare not farther express the effects of antipathy in spirits, which may be brought to pass by the abusing of God's blessings. I will therefore enter into another kind of antipathetical practice, which shall rather tend unto the conservation of man, than the destruction of it. 3 proposition. If 2 lively fleshes that are wounded be applied to each other, they will sympathize and be united, assimilated, and made one continued flesh, so that, as the one prospereth, the other will do the like also conditionally, that the party from whom the added flesh is borrowed, continue in his lively and vegetable disposition. But if the animal tree from which the graft was taken, the body out of which the flesh was lent or cut, do wither or die, that is, doth leave to vegetate and act, then will that borrowed flesh also be at jar and discord with the flesh of the borrower, that liveth and vegetateth, and consequently antipathy will spring out from that union, which was sympathetical before, so that except the dying flesh be amputated, or taken off from the lively flesh, upon the which it was grafted or transplanted, It will cause the living flesh also to gangrenate and corrupt with itself. An experiment to confirm this is well proved and maintained by that experiment in Italy before mentioned. For when a certain noble personage had lost his nose by a wound, and had by the physician's advice made a wound in one of his slaves' arms, and clapped it unto his wounded nose, and so the flesh of the one was bound fast unto the flesh of the other, continuing after that manner, until by a sympathetical agglutination and union, both fleshes became one flesh. Then a gobbet of the slave's flesh was cut out of the arm, and was framed into the shape of a nose on the noble man, and the slave was manumitted, with money in his purse for his pains. It befell, that on a certain time after, the slave did die, and though he departed this life being far distant from his master, yet the borrowed flesh on the master's nose withered and gangrenated, insomuch that the antipathy between these two fleshes, though united into one substance, became so great, that if immediately that dead flesh had not been cut off, it would have corrupted and destroyed the rest. A problematical demonstration from the lodestone. One lodestone doth draw another in his natural position, but being unnaturally ordered, it driveth away or resisteth the other. The demonstration of this problem hath been expressed as well by a lodestone divided in boats, as by two irons swimming on corks. 2 problem. If a plant be cut off and if it be regularly planted or grafted on the same stick, it will grow, but if irregularly it will die. For the proof of this problem, look the 2 proposition of the 5 chapter, in the application unto the vegetable. The application. So if the spirits of the 2 fleshes be unnaturally disposed unto one another, and turn from their sympathetical union, unto an antipathetical duality or disunion, or discord in natures, then will it, after unequal jars follow a general corruption, for corruptum corrumpentis naturam facilim induit. 4 problem. If a spiritual mummy be corrupted by some alien or strange infectious nature, yet in respect of the natural mummy of the sound and wholesome body which is so infested, the sound and wholesome mummy of a body not infected will magnetically attract it, though not so affectionately but more slowly, by reason of the union or adhering of the strange venom unto it, which causeth a mixtion of antipathy with that of sympathy. And the reason of that slowness in the repelling of the antipathetical insult is, because the sound and homogenical mummy doth partly, by his concupiscible act, attract unto it his sympathetical like, and partly expel his contaminating unlike by his irascible property. But for that this antipathetical unlike cleaveth so fast unto his infected like, therefore it happeneth, that the expulsive resistance is but slow, and so the sound spiritual mummy becometh as well corrupted and infected as the other, and by that means sympathy is turned into antipathy. An experiment to confirm this. There are many proofs to maintain this, for when a corrupted spiritual mummy is carried in the air from one infected with a pestilent fever, or smallpox, the mummy so infected doth unite itself, being homogenical unto the sound man's spirit, and in that regard the one embraceth the other. But the sound mummial spirit, perceiving and tasting of the heterogenical, or infected nature, which adhereth unto his like, doth slowly expel or resist it by reason that it doth covet his like, and therefore sympathetically attracteth, and again hateth his unlike, and therefore antipathically expelleth, which is for that reason but slowly performed. And this is the cause, that the expulsive crisis is not made suddenly after the poisonsome infection is received. Neither will sweats or fluxes or eruption of blood out of the nose, which are arguments of the resistance and expulsive faculty of contagious antipathy, suddenly appear, and this is effected sometimes by the sound spirit's conquest, and sometimes by the vain attempt thereof. 1. A problematical demonstration derived from the lodestone. When a small piece of iron is put into a small boat with materials of another loading to float upon the water, and a lodestone be placed in another vessel on the same water, near one another, the coition which will be made betwixt these 2 magnetical bodies will be depraved, weak, and unnatural, because the magnet affecteth and draweth unto it most strongly his like or best beloved, when she is not laded or mixed with materials of a contrary nature, and consequently not agreeing in sympathy with it. An application. To conclude, a mummy which hath an antipathetical infection joined unto it, and applieth in conjunction unto a sound or strong and wholesome mummy, is like as if a portion of the stone called thiamides were joined in a little bark unto the magnet, or a piece of iron also placed in it, and that bark or boat so burthened were applied unto a stone. Stronger magnet in another bark in a basin of water, the strong magnet or lodestone would partly attract his like, namely, the magnet or iron, and partly resist and expel his enemy, and so by reason of his attraction, his expulsion would be the flower. Therefore also the magnetical philosophers hold this for a maxim. 2 problem. The coition or union betwixt 2 magnetical bodies is more quick and nimble than the flight or divorce from one another. For experience teacheth, that magnetical bodies are more sluggishly repelled than they are allured or drawn unto one another. And the reason is, because there is some antipathetical invasion which causeth that hatred, and maketh that irascible resistance between the homogeneal spirit of the mummy, and the heterogeneal poison or infection in it. For we ought to consider, that magnetic bodies do covet sympathetical union. 5 proposition. 2 2 mummies of divers bodies, whereof the one is sound, and the other infected, though in their first coition they seem to agree, by reason of that homogeneal respect which is between them, being in their purity but of one and the same essence, yet for that the one is infected, and for that cause hath endued a heterogeneal disposition, contrary unto the essence of them both, for that reason the second mummy endeavoureth to be divorced from them both. And this is proved thus by this problematical demonstration, drawn out of the lodestone's property. 3 problem. If you shall set 2 small wires on the poles of a lodestone, these wires will be observed to adhere at the lower ends together, upon the point of the pole, but at their tops they will be at discord, and averse unto one another at their upper ends, so that they will be observed to make a fork, as if one end did eschew and fly from the company and society of the other. The conclusion. I could have made a whole volume of experimental propositions, with their problematical proofs, touching the infinite abyss of sympathetical and antipathetical effects in the 3 kingdoms, namely, animal, vegetable and mineral, both mutually between each species or kind, as from the individuals of one kind unto another. But it is not my intention to express my more bold and settled opinions touching the true philosophy and his appendixes, in a larger English phrase considering the roughness and harshness of my pen by reason of my defect, and the insufficiency in the polished nature thereof. Again I know that filed words and phrases are but superficial flashes, and flying shadows of a wealthy and rich subject, the which, as they are Proteus-like changeable unto an infinity of colors, so also are men's fancies and judgments as variable, being the proverb is, so many men, so many minds. I do imagine, and my Minda giveth me, that although I be never so curious in my inditing, or laborious in the phrase of mine expression, yet will my best endeavors appear faulty in the curious eyesight of some men, though perchance acceptable enough unto others. I esteem it sufficient, therefore, that I dare be hearty and bold in the fundamental subject of the essential philosophy, being that it hath truth itself to maintain and defend it, without any adornation made by the gilded tresses of superficial speeches, or verbal explication, and therefore as veritas non quaerit angulos, so also she needeth not the expression of eloquent words, and refined sentences or phrases to illustrate it, and make it more perspicuous in the eyes of wise and learned men, being that it is not unknown unto them, that she doth conquer all. For she is the bright splendor or emanation, which springeth from the omnipotent and eternal fountain. She enlighteneth all, she acteth essentially in all, and over all, and revealeth herself in effect to all, and therefore she is so manifest in all her works, that she needeth not any golden-tongued orator, nor smooth and methodical rhetorician, or slip-learned philosopher, to do her honor, in the expression of her excellency, and recording the perfection of her graces, revealed unto all the world, though the unworthy worldlings will not acknowledge or receive her with reverence, as they ought to do, but rather hide her perpetually, by their best endeavors, with the veil of obscure ignorance, and thereby do not desist to persecute and crucify daily that spiritual Christ, which is the only verity, true wisdom, cornerstone, and essential subject of the true philosophy, whose name be blessed for ever and ever, who onely hath made the heavens and the earth, and everything therein, and sustaineth and preserveth them by the vivification of his Spirit, which opereth all in all, and reigneth in power and glory with the Father, for ever and ever, who will defend his servants from the oppression of evil-minded men, and stand as a shield of defense, to preserve the proclaimer of his truth from the serpentine tongues of malicious backbiters, and the venomous carpings of the cynical and satirical.
Momus. It is he that saith unto the adorer of his truth, Ego dabo vobis amp sapientiam, qui non poterunt resistere amp contradicere omnes adversari vestri.
And therefore, I will say as the prophet David did, in alarum tuarum umbra canam, I will sing the truth under the shadow of thy wings. O Lord, in thee do I put my trust, keep and preserve me from mine enemies for thy mercy's sake. Amen. Finis.